Power doesn't announce itself with trumpets or marble columns. It whispers through silk curtains and locked rooms where pregnant women wait for men who will never leave their thrones. Adrian Ravenshear understood this truth the way wolves understand hunger, instinctively, without mercy, without hesitation. On the night his world began its slow collapse, he stood in his penthouse, overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice steady as the surgeon's hand while he discussed eliminating evidence that breathed and dreamed 20 miles away. The city below him sparkled like a promise he never intended to keep. What happened next would shatter every carefully constructed lie he'd built across a decade of calculated seduction and strategic murder. Stay with me through the darkness ahead, because some secrets don't just destroy dynasties. They reveal exactly what kind of monsters we permit to rule us, and what it costs the women foolish enough to believe love exists in the hearts of men who've learned to profit from its absence. The October rain hammered against the windows of the Ravensshire estate in Dutchess County, like nature itself was trying to break through and expose what festered inside. Evelyn Carter stood in the conservatory, one hand pressed against the cool glass, the other resting on the swell of her belly where a 6-month-old secret kicked and turned, oblivious to the trap closing around them both. She'd been beautiful once in that ordinary way. Working girls are beautiful, bright-eyed and believing the world rewards goodness with goodness. 3 years as Adrian's kept woman had carved that innocence away like water eroding stone. What remained was something harder, more watchful, though she didn't fully understand yet that survival instincts were finally waking inside her. The mansion sprawled across 12 acres of carefully manicured isolation. No neighbors, no unexpected visitors. Adrian had chosen the location the way generals choose battlefields, with complete awareness of every entrance, every exit, every potential witness to what happened in the spaces between his public smile and private cruelty. Evelyn heard his car first. The gravel driveway announced arrivals a full minute before headlights swept across the conservatory windows. She straightened reflexively, checking her reflection in the dark glass. Hairbrushed, dressed modest but elegant, the performance of contentment he required from her even when they were alone. Adrian entered through the side door, his Brioni suit barely damp despite the downpour. He'd learned early that men with enough money never really get wet. There's always an umbrella, always a covered walkway, always someone ensuring their comfort before they even notice its absence. He didn't kiss her. Hadn't in months. Instead, he moved directly to the bar cart, pouring 3 fingers of scotch with the mechanical precision of ritual. Evelyn knew better than to speak first. She'd learned that particular lesson the hard way, back when she still believed their relationship operated under normal rules of affection and reciprocity. "You're showing," Adrian said finally, his back still to her. His voice carried that flat affect she'd grown to recognize as danger. "We'll need to be more careful about the staff." "I haven't left the house in 2 weeks," she replied quietly. "The housekeeper is the only person who sees me, and you said she's loyal." Adrian turned, examining her with the same detached assessment he might apply to a quarterly earnings report. "Loyalty is a transaction, Evelyn. Never forget that. People remain loyal exactly as long as their incentives align with your interests. The moment someone offers Mrs. Kovach more money for information about what happens in this house, her loyalty becomes a fiction we're paying too much to maintain." He crossed to where she stood, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and austere that probably cost more than she used to make in a month waitressing. His hand moved to her stomach, resting there without warmth, a property assessment masquerading as tenderness. "How are you feeling?" The question emerged perfunctory, obligatory. "Tired. The baby keeps me awake." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You need to manage that. I can't have you looking exhausted when people ask questions." Pregnancy is supposed to create a glow, not dark circles and complaints. Something small and crucial broke inside Evelyn in that moment, though she couldn't have articulated exactly what. She'd spent 3 years translating his cruelty into love, convincing herself that his coldness was simply the armor powerful men wore to survive dangerous worlds. But standing there with his hand on their child like she was livestock being appraised, the translation stopped working. "When will you tell her?" Evelyn asked. The question escaped before wisdom could cage it. Adrian's hand withdrew. His expression shifted into something she recognized from business negotiations. The calculation before violence. Tell who what? Clarissa. Your fiancée. When will you tell her you're calling off the engagement? The silence stretched long enough for Evelyn to hear rain hammering the conservatory roof, water finding every weakness in the aging structure. Adrian smiled. It was worse than anger, worse than any explosion she'd been bracing for. The smile carried infinite patience for her stupidity, boundless tolerance for the delusion she'd apparently been nurturing. Darling, he said, and the endearment landed like a slap. I'm not calling off the engagement. I'm announcing it publicly in 3 weeks at the Met Gala. Clarissa's father is funding my Senate campaign. Her family's pharmaceutical empire gives us access to every major donor on the eastern seaboard. Surely you understand the difference between love and legacy. Evelyn felt her knees weaken. She reached for the window frame, steadying herself against vertigo. But you said... I said many things. Adrian's voice remained conversational, almost gentle. That's rather the point of courtship, isn't it? Creating conditions where both parties believe they're getting what they want. You wanted to believe a duke from a dynasty family would abandon his inheritance for a waitress from Queens. I wanted a beautiful distraction while navigating political pressures. We both got precisely what we needed from the arrangement. The baby. She hated how small her voice sounded. Our baby. Will be provided for. Adrian returned to his scotch, this conversation already boring him. You'll sign an NDA, obviously. I'll establish a trust fund, something modest but sufficient. You'll relocate somewhere quiet. Montana, perhaps. Or one of those dreadful coastal towns where people pretend poverty is picturesque. The child will never know my name, and you'll never speak it. In exchange, you'll have enough money to live comfortably if you're sensible about budgeting. Evelyn stared at him like he'd begun speaking a foreign language. 3 years of her life. 3 years of believing his promises, his late-night phone calls filled with longing, his careful construction of a future that apparently existed only in her imagination. And if I refuse? The words emerged hoarse, already defeated. Adrian turned, and for the first time that evening, she saw real emotion in his eyes. Not love, not even anger. Something colder. The absolute certainty of a man who'd never encountered an obstacle his money and status couldn't eliminate. Then you'll discover exactly how effectively powerful men erase mistakes. You'll sign the NDA, Evelyn. The only question is whether you do it voluntarily with your dignity intact and your bank account funded, or involuntarily after learning precisely how fragile your existence really is. I've made women disappear before. I'm quite good at it. The room tilted. Evelyn gripped the window frame harder, her knuckles white against dark wood. Your wife, she whispered. Catherine. Adrian's expression didn't change. My late wife had similar delusions about agency and choice. She threatened to expose certain financial arrangements that would have complicated my father's gubernatorial campaign. Catherine learned too late that threatening a Ravenshire is indistinguishable from suicide. We mourned her very publicly. Beautiful funeral. I gave a eulogy that made half the congregation weep. The rain intensified, hammering the conservatory glass like it wanted to break through and wash away everything polluted it was witnessing. How? Evelyn barely recognized her own voice. Adrian finished his scotch, setting the crystal tumbler down with finality. Does it matter? Car accidents are so tragically common. Catherine was always a nervous driver. Everyone said so. Even her own mother agreed she shouldn't have been on that mountain road during a storm. The brakes failing was simply awful luck. These things happen. He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. You have until the end of the month to decide, Evelyn. Sign the paperwork, take the money, and disappear into whatever mediocre life you would have lived anyway. Or resist and discover that the legal system is remarkably sympathetic to prominent families fighting off delusional mistresses who invent pregnancies to extort wealthy men. My lawyers are exceptionally creative. We've used that particular strategy before. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow contained more violence than any slam door ever could. Evelyn stood alone in the conservatory as rain hammered the windows and her daughter kicked inside her, utterly oblivious to the trap she'd been conceived into. The baby had Adrian's DNA, but none of his cruelty yet. That innocence felt simultaneously precious and doomed. For 3 years, Evelyn had performed the role of mistress with the dedication some women bring to careers or motherhood. She'd convinced herself that love justified the secrecy, that Adrian's coldness was protection rather than contempt, that powerful men simply love differently than ordinary people. But standing alone in that conservatory with rain trying to break through glass that would never shatter, Evelyn finally understood the difference between being cherished and being owned. Adrian had never loved her. He'd acquired her, and now he was planning her disposal with the same detached efficiency he probably applied to outdated furniture or inconvenient business partners. Her mind drifted to Catherine, Adrian's first wife. The woman whose death had seemed like tragic misfortune until 10 seconds ago when it revealed itself as calculated murder. Had Catherine stood in this same conservatory, feeling the same suffocating awareness that she'd fallen in love with a man whose only real relationship was with power itself? Evelyn moved through the dark house, navigating rooms that suddenly felt less like luxury and more like a very expensive prison. The staff had retired hours ago. Mrs. Kovach's loyalty, apparently transactional, didn't extend to late-night companionship. Evelyn was alone with 6 months of pregnancy, 3 years of demolished illusions, and the growing certainty that Adrian Ravenshire had every intention of making her disappear the moment she stopped being useful. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, her hand trailing along the mahogany banister that probably cost more than her parents' entire house in Queens. The master bedroom door stood open. Adrian never spent nights here anymore. He came for afternoon visits, inspected her like livestock, delivered instructions or threats, then returned to Manhattan, where his real life happened. Evelyn passed that room, moving instead toward the study at the end of the hall. Adrian kept an office here for the rare occasions he worked from the estate. She'd never been explicitly forbidden from entering, but the invisible boundaries of their arrangement had always been clear. His spaces remained his. She existed in the margins, ornamental and temporary. Tonight those boundaries felt quaint, irrelevant. You can't trespass in your own prison. The study door swung open silently. Moonlight through tall windows illuminated leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes she suspected Adrian had never actually read. The desk dominated the space, massive, ornate, the kind of furniture that announces authority before anyone sits behind it. Evelyn moved to the desk, her heart hammering. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Evidence? Confirmation that Adrian's confession wasn't some cruel joke? Proof that Catherine's death involved actual murder rather than tragic accident? The drawers were locked. Of course they were. Men like Adrian didn't leave evidence scattered casually across mahogany surfaces. But the top drawer yielded to pressure. Either Adrian had forgotten to secure it, or he'd grown so confident in his control that locks seemed unnecessary. Inside, beneath folders of financial documents she didn't understand, Evelyn found a leather portfolio secured with a combination lock. Her fingers trembled as she tried combinations. Their anniversary. Adrian's birthday. Her birthday. Nothing worked. Then, almost as an afterthought, she tried Catherine's birthday. The date she'd seen on the gravestone that one time Adrian had allowed her to accompany him to the cemetery for appearance's sake. The lock clicked open. Inside the portfolio, Evelyn found documents that would eventually destroy Adrian's empire, though she didn't fully comprehend their significance yet. Police reports from Catherine's accident marked with handwritten notes in Adrian's precise script. Photographs of brake lines someone had clearly tampered with. Text messages between Adrian and a mechanic whose name appeared on several Ravenshire corporate accounts. Financial transfers made 3 days after Catherine's death, money flowing from Adrian's personal accounts to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands. But more than that, Evelyn found a pattern. Catherine wasn't Adrian's first inconvenience. The portfolio contained similar documentation for 2 other women. A graduate student who'd been involved with Adrian during his Harvard days found dead from an apparent overdose despite having no history of drug use. A paralegal who'd worked for the Ravenshire family firm, killed in a robbery gone wrong that police never solved despite her wallet and jewelry remaining untouched. Adrian Ravenshire didn't just kill his wife, he collected deaths the way some men collect watches or vintage cars. Each woman represented a problem solved, a threat neutralized, a vulnerability eliminated with the cold efficiency of someone who'd learned that consequences are optional for people born into the right families. Evelyn's hand shook as she photographed every document with her phone. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her mother's terror. Some primal instinct was finally overriding 3 years of practiced denial. She'd fallen in love with a serial killer who'd simply refined his method over time, learning to make murders look like accidents that grieving families could accept. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, male, moving toward the study with purpose. Panic flooded her system, sharp and chemical. Evelyn shoved the portfolio back into the drawer, clicked the lock shut, closed the drawer as quietly as her trembling hands allowed. She barely made it to the door before Adrian appeared in the hallway, his expression dark with suspicion. "What are you doing up here?" His voice carried that flat affect again, the one that preceded violence. "I couldn't sleep." Evelyn forced her voice steady, channeling 3 years of performance. "The baby. I was looking for the book you mentioned, about prenatal development." Adrian studied her with the intensity of a prosecutor examining hostile witnesses. His gaze moved from her face to the study behind her, calculating. "That book is in the conservatory library, you know that. We discussed it 3 weeks ago." "I forgot. The pregnancy. It makes me foggy sometimes." The silence stretched. Evelyn could hear rain still hammering the roof, nature's percussion soundtrack to this moment, where her life hung on whether Adrian's suspicion outweighed his arrogance. Men this powerful often couldn't imagine threats from women they'd already categorized as defeated. "Go to bed, Evelyn." Adrian's hand moved to her shoulder, gripping just hard enough to communicate ownership. "Tomorrow we'll discuss your relocation timeline in detail. I want you out of this house before the engagement announcement. Mrs. Kovac will help you pack. You'll take only what you arrived with. Everything else remains property of the estate." He released her, moving past into the study. Evelyn walked away on legs that barely held her weight, forcing herself not to run despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. She made it to her bedroom, closed the door, locked it with shaking hands that couldn't quite find the mechanism at first. Only then did she allow herself to collapse against the door, sliding down to sit on imported Italian tile while rain hammered windows, and her daughter kicked inside her like she was trying to fight her way free of this nightmare before birth even happened. Evelyn pulled out her phone, staring at the photograph she'd taken. Evidence that could destroy Adrian Ravenshire. Proof that New York's most eligible bachelor was actually a murderer who'd spent a decade eliminating women the way other people delete spam emails. But evidence meant nothing without someone powerful enough to use it. Adrian controlled judges, prosecutors, police commissioners. He'd said it himself. The legal system bent toward men like him, shaped itself around their needs, protected their interests with the zealous efficiency of believers defending faith itself. Evelyn needed help. Not from lawyers who worked for men like Adrian, not from police who socialized with the Ravenshire family at galas and fundraisers. She needed someone who existed outside those circles, someone whose career depended on exposing exactly the kind of corruption Adrian represented. She opened her phone's browser, hands still trembling, and searched for the name she'd seen mentioned occasionally in articles about elite crime. Nathan Cole, the investigative journalist who'd destroyed a senator's career last year by exposing bribery schemes. The reporter who'd made enemies of half Manhattan's old money families by insisting that wealth didn't purchase immunity from consequence. His website listed an encrypted email address for confidential tips. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, understanding that sending that message would transform her from victim into active threat. Adrian didn't just eliminate women who knew too much. He destroyed them systematically, erasing their credibility before erasing their lives. But what choice remained? Sign his NDA and disappear into Montana poverty with a daughter who'd grow up never knowing her father was a monster. Hope Adrian's promises meant something despite every pattern suggesting otherwise? Trust that men who kill for convenience suddenly develop conscience when confronted with their own children? Evelyn began typing. Her hand steadied as words appeared on screen, each sentence an irrevocable step away from the life she'd imagined and towards something unclear but at least honest. She attached the photographs. Hit send before terror could stop her. The message vanished into digital space, carrying with it the only leverage she possessed against a man who'd murdered at least 4 women and probably more. Evelyn set the phone down, wrapped her arms around her belly, and waited for morning to arrive with whatever destruction it would bring. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Manhattan glittered in the distance, a city of lights that promised so much and delivered so little to women who made the mistake of believing powerful men when they said love. Adrian stood in his study, examining the drawer Evelyn had clearly searched through. The portfolio remained where he'd left it, locked and apparently undisturbed. But something felt wrong. A slight shift in position. Papers not quite aligned the way his obsessive nature demanded. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number he used for problems requiring discrete solutions. The voice that answered was professional, empty of curiosity. "Yes, Mr. Ravenshire. I need surveillance footage from the Dutchess County estate," Adrian said quietly. "Every camera. Tonight's recordings. Send them within the hour." He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Men in his employ understood that questions were unemployment applications. They did what he paid them for, reported what he needed to know, and never wondered why powerful men required so much darkness to maintain their light. Adrian moved to the window, looking out at ground shrouded in post-storm darkness. Somewhere in this house, Evelyn was probably congratulating herself for whatever small rebellion she'd just committed. Women always believed they were cleverer than they actually were. They read spy novels and imagined themselves capable of espionage, never understanding that real power didn't operate through secret maneuvers. It operated through institutions, through networks, through the accumulated advantage of centuries of wealthy families ensuring the system protected their interests. Whatever Evelyn thought she'd discovered tonight, whatever evidence she believed she possessed, would matter exactly as much as every other threat he'd neutralized across a decade of careful violence. The machinery existed to handle these situations. He'd simply have to activate it sooner than planned. Adrian made 3 phone calls. The first to his head of security, requesting enhanced surveillance on Evelyn and isolation from outside communication. The second to his attorney, instructing preparation of involuntary commitment paperwork. Pregnant women experiencing psychiatric breaks required hospitalization, after all. The third to a doctor whose medical license depended on Ravenshire family donations, requesting a professional opinion about a troubled woman exhibiting signs of postpartum psychosis 6 weeks premature. By the time dawn arrived, every mechanism of Evelyn's destruction would be in motion. She'd wake thinking herself brave. She'd discover by nightfall that courage without power is just another word for victim. The city glittered in the distance, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding in Dutchess County. Manhattan had witnessed countless women destroyed by wealthy men. It would witness countless more. The machinery of that destruction was too efficient, too well established, too profitable to interrupt for something as trivial as conscience or justice. Adrian returned to his scotch, patient as predators always are when they've already seen how the hunt ends. Evelyn would struggle. They always did. But struggle without power is just entertainment for people bored enough to watch the theater of inevitability. The only question remaining was whether she'd be smart enough to accept her destruction gracefully, or foolish enough to fight and make the process entertaining for the men orchestrating it. Fact. The hour before dawn is when secrets reveal themselves. Evelyn sat by her bedroom window, watching darkness slowly dissolve into that uncertain gray light that precedes sunrise. Her phone rested in her lap, silent since she'd sent the message to Nathan Cole. No response yet. Maybe no response ever. Journalists probably received hundreds of conspiracy theories from desperate people every day. Why would hers seem credible? Because it was true. Because she had photographs. Because Catherine Ravenshire's death and at least 3 others weren't accidents or coincidences, but the systematic elimination of women who'd become inconvenient to a man who'd learned murder was simply another tool for managing complications. Evelyn's hand moved to her belly, feeling her daughter kick and turn. She'd already begun thinking of the baby as a daughter, though no ultrasound had confirmed gender. Some knowing beyond medicine told her she was carrying a girl who would grow up either destroyed by proximity to Adrian Ravenshire or protected by his complete absence. There would be no middle ground, no shared custody arrangement, no civilized divorce mediation. Men like Adrian didn't do civilized when their control was threatened. They did complete annihilation of everyone who'd witnessed their masks slip. Her phone buzzed. Evelyn nearly dropped it, fingers clumsy with sudden terror. The message was from an encrypted email address. 3 words. Stay safe. Investigating. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. Nathan Cole had received the message. More than that, he'd responded within hours, suggesting the evidence she'd sent carried enough weight to warrant immediate action. But relief dissolved almost immediately into new fear. If Nathan was investigating, Adrian would discover it within days, maybe hours. His networks monitored threats with the efficiency of immune systems detecting foreign bodies. The moment journalists started asking questions about Catherine's death, or digging into Ravenshire family finances, alarms would trigger throughout the family's extensive security apparatus. Evelyn had maybe 72 hours before Adrian knew exactly what she'd done. Probably less. She needed to leave this house. But where could someone 6 months pregnant go that Adrian's resources couldn't find her? He had private investigators, police connections, surveillance capabilities that probably included access to cell phone tracking and credit card monitoring. The moment she used her phone or accessed her bank account, he'd know her location. The door handle rattled. Evelyn's heart stopped. She'd locked it last night, but locks meant nothing to people who owned buildings. "Evelyn?" Mrs. Kovach's voice, sharp with the irritation of someone whose routine has been disrupted. "Why is this door locked? Mr. Ravenshire wants you downstairs immediately." Of course he did. Adrian had probably spent the night reviewing surveillance footage, confirming his suspicions, preparing whatever destruction he'd decided was appropriate. Evelyn moved to the door, unlocking it with hands that trembled despite her attempts at steadiness. Mrs. Kovach stood in the hallway, her expression carrying that particular contempt staff sometimes develop for wealthy men's mistresses. She'd always known Evelyn was temporary. Adrian probably fucked the staff in similar terms. This one lasts 6 months, that one a year. None of them permanent enough to warrant basic courtesy. "He's in the breakfast room," Mrs. Kovach said curtly. "You should dress more appropriately. This isn't a nightclub." Evelyn glanced down at the simple cotton nightgown she'd worn to sleep. Not particularly revealing, not inappropriate for a pregnant woman at dawn. But Mrs. Kovach's contempt had never been about actual violations. It was about hierarchy, establishing that even the housekeeper ranked higher than the pregnant mistress in the Ravenshire social order. "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes, Evelyn replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Fear sometimes crystallizes into a kind of clarity when survival requires performance. Mrs. Kovach's mouth tightened, but she left without arguing. Evelyn closed the door, moved to the bathroom, stared at her reflection in mirrors framed with lighting designed to make beautiful people look even better. She looked exhausted, pregnant, scared. The expensive skincare products Adrian provided hadn't prevented dark circles or the hollow anxiety in her eyes. She dressed in loose pants and a sweater that covered her belly, applied minimal makeup, braided her hair back. The physical routine felt like armor, each small gesture of normalcy a defense against the panic threatening to consume her. Adrian sat in the breakfast room with coffee and the Wall Street Journal spread before him like props in a performance of normalcy. Morning light streamed through tall windows, making everything look deceptively peaceful. A silver coffee service gleamed on the sideboard. Fresh flowers, peonies, expensive and perfectly arranged, occupied a crystal vase at the table's center. "Good morning," Adrian said without looking up from his newspaper. "Sleep well?" The performance was uncanny. His voice carried none of last night's casual cruelty. He might have been a normal husband inquiring about his wife's rest, but Evelyn had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. He knew. Maybe not details, but he sensed betrayal hovering close. "Well enough," she lied, taking the seat across from him. "The baby kept me awake." Adrian folded his newspaper with precise movements, finally looking at her directly. "We need to discuss your departure timeline. I've decided to accelerate the schedule. You'll be leaving this afternoon." The words landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Evelyn forced herself to meet his gaze, forced her expression into something resembling acceptance. "That's very sudden. My mother's planning to visit the estate this weekend." Adrian's voice remained conversational, almost kind. "She can't know about you, about any of this. You understand how complicated that would be." His mother. Evelyn had met Constance Ravenshire exactly twice. Both times, the woman had looked through her like she didn't exist, the way wealthy people look through service staff. Adrian's father had died years ago, leaving Constance as the dynasty's matriarch, a woman who'd spent 4 decades perfecting the art of maintaining status through ruthless social calculation. "Where will I go?" Evelyn asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Adrian slid a manila folder across the table. "Everything is arranged. There's a house in Montana. Very private, very comfortable. The trust fund details are inside. You'll sign the paperwork this morning. My attorney will arrive at 11. And if I refuse?" Adrian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then we move to Plan B. And Plan B is significantly less pleasant for everyone involved, particularly you. I've arranged for Dr. Morrison to evaluate you if necessary. He's prepared to testify that you've been experiencing severe psychiatric episodes. Pregnant women sometimes develop dangerous delusions. It's quite tragic. Hospitalization becomes necessary to protect both mother and child. The threat was clear. Adrian had constructed a narrative where Evelyn's resistance would be pathologized, her credibility destroyed, her freedom eliminated through involuntary commitment. She'd disappear not into Montana, but into some private psychiatric facility where wealthy families warehoused inconvenient relatives. "I understand," Evelyn said quietly. "I'll sign whatever you want." Adrian's expression softened marginally, pleased by what he interpreted as surrender. "Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. You're not like Catherine. She never understood when battles were already lost." "What happened to her?" Evelyn couldn't stop herself from asking. "Really happened?" Adrian stood, moving to pour fresh coffee. His back to her, he spoke with the casual tone people use for weather discussion. "Catherine threatened to expose certain financial arrangements my father had made during his final campaign. She didn't understand that exposing him meant destroying the family's political future. Her death was unfortunate, but necessary. These things happen when people prioritize self-righteousness over survival." He turned, coffee cup in hand, expression entirely calm. "She drove herself off that cliff, Evelyn. I simply ensured the brakes failed at the most convenient moment. The difference is semantics. The outcome was inevitable, either way. The casual admission was somehow more horrifying than last night's threats." Adrian wasn't confessing out of guilt or seeking absolution. He was explaining reality to someone too naive to understand how power actually operated. In his worldview, Catherine's murder wasn't a crime. It was problem-solving. Evelyn felt bile rising in her throat. She forced it down, forced her expression neutral, forced herself to play the role of defeated mistress, accepting her fate. But beneath the performance, determination hardened into something Adrian would eventually recognize too late. "I'll be ready when your attorney arrives," she said quietly. Adrian nodded, satisfied, already dismissing her from his attention as he returned to his newspaper. Just another problem solved. Just another inconvenient woman accepting her erasure with appropriate grace. Evelyn left the breakfast room, climbed the stairs to her bedroom, closed the door, and pulled out her phone with hands that no longer trembled. Terror had crystallized into something clearer, something harder. Adrian Ravenshire thought he'd won because wealthy men always won. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd confessed to murder directly to a woman who was already documenting everything. Evelyn opened her phone's voice recording app. The entire breakfast conversation was saved, time-stamped, backed up to cloud storage Adrian didn't know existed. His casual description of sabotaging Catherine's brakes, his threat of involuntary commitment, his complete certainty that consequences were optional for people born into sufficient privilege. She sent the recording to Nathan Cole with a brief message. "He's moving to eliminate me this afternoon. Whatever you're investigating, it needs to happen now." The response came within minutes. "Stay where you are. Police are already involved. Federal investigators want to talk to you. Can you hold out until tonight?" Evelyn stared at the message, hardly daring to believe it. Nathan hadn't just received her evidence. He'd apparently already been building a case against Adrian, and her documentation provided the final pieces needed for prosecution. But tonight was hours away. Adrian's attorney would arrive at 11. The paperwork she'd be forced to sign probably included clauses ensuring her silence and accepting her disappearance into Montana isolation. By tonight, she might be in a psychiatric facility or already disappeared into whatever mechanism Adrian used for permanent elimination. Her phone buzzed again. "Nathan, actually change of plan. Get out now. Don't wait. Adrian's security just contacted your cell phone provider requesting location data. They'll be monitoring everything. Leave the phone. Leave everything. There's a church 2 miles west on County Road 17, St. Michael's. Meet me there in 1 hour. I'm bringing federal agents." Evelyn's heart hammered. An hour to escape a 12-acre estate where she had no car, no money, no phone once she left it behind. 6 months pregnant and trying to flee on foot through terrain she barely knew. But staying meant accepting whatever destruction Adrian had planned. And Adrian's plans invariably involved making problems disappear permanently. She pulled on practical shoes, grabbed a jacket, shoved what little cash she kept hidden in her dresser into her pocket. Maybe $300 total. Enough for a bus ticket if she could reach a station. Not enough for anything resembling safety. Evelyn moved to her bedroom door, listening for movement in the hallway. Mrs. Kovach would be downstairs preparing lunch. Adrian had returned to Manhattan for morning meetings. The ground staff worked mainly on the property's perimeter, now or never. She opened the door, moved down the hallway with as much quiet as her pregnant body allowed. The stairs creaked under her weight, that unavoidable sound of old architecture protesting occupation. She froze, waiting for Mrs. Kovacs to appear and demand explanations. Silence. Evelyn reached the ground floor, moved toward the side entrance Adrian used when visiting. The door opened onto a covered walkway that led to the garage where her car had been stored months ago, disabled at Adrian's instruction because pregnant mistresses didn't need independent transportation. The October air hit her face, cold, clean, carrying the smell of wet leaves and approaching winter. She moved quickly across the gravel drive, each footfall announcing her presence to anyone watching. The property stretched out before her, 12 acres of carefully maintained isolation. Somewhere beyond the tree line, County Road 17 ran west toward St. Michael's Church and federal agents who apparently wanted to help. She made it 20 feet before hearing Adrian's voice behind her. "Going somewhere?" Evelyn turned. Adrian stood in the doorway she'd just exited, his expression carrying none of the casual pleasantness from breakfast. This was Adrian stripped of performance, cold, calculating, already running scenarios for how to contain this new complication. "Just getting fresh air," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite terror flooding her system. "The baby." "Movement helps." Adrian pulled out his phone, pressed a button, spoke without shifting his gaze from her. "She's trying to leave." "Yes. Secure the perimeter. No one enters or exits the property until I say otherwise." He hung up, pocketed the phone, and moved toward Evelyn with the deliberate pace of predators who know their prey has nowhere to run. "You contacted someone," he said quietly. "Who was it? A journalist? Police? One of those tedious advocacy groups that imagines itself capable of challenging institutional power?" Evelyn said nothing. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective of the daughter who was about to become Adrian's permanent hostage if she couldn't find some way to escape. Adrian reached her, his hand closing around her upper arm with enough pressure to hurt without leaving visible bruises. He'd learned that particular technique early, how to cause pain without evidence, how to dominate without documentation. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" His voice carried genuine curiosity beneath the threat. "That you'd send some messages, talk to some journalist, and suddenly the legal system would protect you from me?" "Evelyn, sweetheart, the legal system exists to protect people like me from people like you. That's its entire purpose. Maintaining order, preserving hierarchy, ensuring that women who fuck powerful men don't delude themselves into thinking sex grants them equity." He began walking her back toward the house, his grip unrelenting. Evelyn tried to pull free, but 6 months of pregnancy had weakened her in ways that made resistance futile. Adrian moved her inside, up the stairs, toward the bedroom that was about to transform from luxury prison into actual cell. At the bedroom door, Evelyn made one final attempt at escape. She twisted hard, breaking his grip for just a moment, stumbling toward the stairs. But pregnancy destroyed her balance. She felt herself falling, her body lurching forward, terror flooding through her with the certainty that she was about to lose everything. Her daughter, her life, her last chance at escape. Adrian caught her. His arm locked around her waist, pulling her back from the stairway with enough force to drive the breath from her lungs. For one suspended moment, Evelyn couldn't tell if he'd saved her or if he was already calibrating whether her death via accidental fall might solve his problems more efficiently than the elaborate mechanisms he'd been constructing. "That would have been unfortunate," Adrian said quietly, his mouth close to her ear. "Tragic accidents happen. But let's save that particular strategy for when all other options have been exhausted." He pushed her into the bedroom, closed the door, locked it from the outside. Evelyn heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, heard him on the phone arranging something, his voice too distant to make out specific words. She stood alone in the locked room, her daughter kicking inside her, her phone abandoned on the dresser where she'd left it to avoid tracking. No way out. No communication. Adrian's security team securing the perimeter to ensure no federal agents or journalists or anyone else could reach her before he'd completed whatever elimination he was planning. Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at grounds that had seemed beautiful when she'd first arrived 3 years ago, innocent enough then to interpret isolation as romance rather than imprisonment. From this angle, she could see the tree line where County Road 17 presumably ran. So close. Maybe a quarter mile, but utterly unreachable with locked doors and security teams patrolling the perimeter. Her phone buzzed. She'd left it unlocked, and messages kept arriving. Nathan Cole, increasingly urgent. Where are you? Federal agents at the church. Ready to move on the estate with warrant. Need confirmation you're safe first. Then, Evelyn, if you don't respond in the next 30 minutes, we're assuming worst-case scenario. Coming in regardless. Hold on. She couldn't respond. Couldn't tell Nathan that Adrian had already caught her, that she was locked in a bedroom watching her rescue approach too slowly, while a man who'd murdered at least 4 women decided whether to add her to that count. The baby kicked hard, sharp pain beneath Evelyn's ribs, her daughter fighting for space, for air, for life, in a body that was about to either escape or die trying. Outside, sirens began wailing in the distance, growing louder, approaching fast. Federal agents keeping Nathan's promise, coming for her even without confirmation of safety, willing to force entry into a wealthy family's estate based on nothing more than evidence from a desperate pregnant woman they'd never met. Evelyn heard shouting downstairs, Adrian's voice, sharp with anger, Mrs. Kovac responding, confused. More sirens. Car doors slamming, someone announcing themselves as FBI, demanding Adrian Ravenshire present himself immediately. The sounds of an empire collapsing echoed through the old mansion, while Evelyn Carter stood locked in a bedroom, her hand pressed against glass that wouldn't break, watching federal agents swarm the grounds like an immune system finally recognizing the infection it needed to purge. But Adrian still had keys. Adrian still controlled the immediate space between her and rescue. And men this cornered sometimes made choices that proved terminal for everyone in proximity to their fall. The door handle rattled. Not gently, someone forcing it, metal grinding against metal as the lock resisted. Then silence. Footsteps retreating. Then an explosion of sound. The door kicked open, the frame splintering, a federal agent in tactical gear entering with weapon drawn, scanning the room with professional efficiency. Behind him, Nathan Cole appeared, younger than she'd imagined from his articles, his expression carrying both relief at finding her alive and fury at what Adrian had almost accomplished. Evelyn Carter? Nathan asked, though he clearly already knew. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. You're safe now, Nathan said. Adrian's in custody. He can't hurt you anymore. But even as Nathan spoke those words, even as federal agents secured the house and read Adrian his rights somewhere downstairs, Evelyn understood that safety was more complicated than arrests and custody. She'd just destroyed a powerful family's heir. The Ravenshires would deploy every resource to discredit her, to paint her as a delusional mistress inventing crimes to extort money, to ensure Adrian's conviction became impossible despite overwhelming evidence. The real battle was just beginning, and battles against dynasties that had spent centuries consolidating power required more than evidence or courage. They required endurance through the machinery of destruction wealthy families deployed against threats to their legacy. Evelyn followed Nathan downstairs on legs that barely held her, her hand pressed protectively over her belly where her daughter kicked and turned, blissfully unaware that she'd just been born into a war that would define both their lives for years to come. Through windows, she saw Adrian standing in handcuffs on the driveway, surrounded by federal agents. Even arrested, even caught, he carried himself with the certainty of men who'd never truly believed consequences applied to them. His gaze found her through the window, locked on. And in that moment, Evelyn saw not remorse or defeat, but cold calculation. Adrian was already strategizing his defense, already mobilizing resources, already ensuring this arrest would become the opening move in a longer game of destruction. The man who'd killed his wife and 3 other women wasn't finished killing. He was simply selecting his next weapon from the arsenal wealthy families maintained for exactly these situations. And Evelyn, 6 months pregnant and exhausted from 3 years of systematic manipulation, would have to find strength she didn't know she possessed to survive what was coming next. Adrian Ravenshire's arrest should have been the end. Federal agents reading Miranda rights on a gravel driveway while helicopters circled overhead filming everything for networks that would replay the footage for weeks. The kind of public humiliation that destroys dynasties and ends legacies. Evelyn watched it happen from that shattered bedroom doorway. Nathan Cole beside her murmuring reassurances about witness protection and justice finally prevailing. But she'd spent 3 years studying how power actually operates. long enough to understand that wealthy families don't collapse from single arrests. They metastasize. They adapt. They deploy resources ordinary people can't even imagine exist. Adrian met her eyes as federal agents loaded him into an unmarked vehicle, and his expression carried no fear, just cold assessment. He was already calculating, already mobilizing the machinery that would transform this arrest from ending into opening move. The federal agent who'd kicked down her door introduced himself as Special Agent Marcus Webb. Mid-40s, carrying himself with that particular weariness of law enforcement officers who've seen enough corruption to stop being surprised by it. He guided Evelyn downstairs while other agents photographed rooms and cataloged evidence, their practiced efficiency suggesting this wasn't their first time dismantling a wealthy family's secrets. "We need your full statement," Agent Webb said as they reached the conservatory where this nightmare had accelerated just hours ago. "Everything you know. Everything he told you. Exact words if possible." Evelyn sank into one of the ornate chairs Adrian had selected specifically because they looked expensive without being comfortable. Her daughter kicked hard, protesting the stress flooding her mother's system with cortisol and adrenaline. Nathan pulled out a recording device, setting it on the glass table between them. "This is being documented for federal prosecution. Take your time. Start wherever makes sense." Where did it make sense? 3 years ago, when a waitress from Queens met a duke who made her believe fairy tales weren't just stories people told children, or earlier with Catherine Ravenshire's death that everyone accepted as tragic accident, or further back to the graduate student who'd supposedly overdosed despite having no history of drug use. "He killed his wife," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Catherine. He told me directly. Said her death was necessary because she threatened to expose financial crimes his father committed during a gubernatorial campaign." Agent Webb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, that specific alertness of hunters catching scent of prey. "Go on." Evelyn walked them through everything. Adrian's confession about sabotaging Catherine's brakes, the portfolio she'd found containing documentation of multiple deaths connected to women who'd been involved with Adrian, his casual description of how the legal system existed to protect men like him from women like her, the threats of involuntary psychiatric commitment, his plan to force her into Montana isolation with their daughter as permanent leverage. Nathan's face darkened as she spoke, his journalist instincts clearly cataloging every detail for the story he'd eventually write. Agent Webb took notes with mechanical precision, occasionally asking clarifying questions that suggested he'd been investigating the Ravensshire family for longer than this morning's raid. When Evelyn finished, silence settled over the conservatory. Outside, federal agents moved across the grounds with crime scene equipment, transforming Adrian's carefully maintained estate into evidence of systematic corruption. "This is bigger than we initially understood," Agent Webb said finally. "We came here investigating financial crimes, money laundering, bribery, campaign finance violations tied to the Senate race. The homicides are new information." "How new?" Nathan asked sharply. "Because I sent you evidence about Catherine's death 3 days ago." Agent Webb's jaw tightened. "Evidence we're still processing. Murder cases require overwhelming documentation before federal prosecutors will touch old money families. The Ravenshires have judges, senators, half the state bar association on their payroll. We needed ironclad proof before moving." "So you were going to let Evelyn die while you gathered more proof?" Nathan's voice carried the particular fury of journalists who've spent careers watching institutions prioritize procedure over protection. "We moved the moment you indicated imminent danger." Agent Webb's tone remained professional, but an edge had entered it. "Ms. Carter is alive. Adrian Ravenshire is in custody. Federal prosecutors are already building cases for multiple homicides, financial crimes, and conspiracy charges that will ensure he never walks free. This is the outcome we wanted." But even as Agent Webb spoke those words, Evelyn heard doubt beneath the confidence. He knew what she was only beginning to understand, that arrests were just opening moves in much longer games. The Ravenshire family had spent 4 generations consolidating power. They wouldn't surrender it because one heir got caught. Her phone rang. She'd retrieved it after federal agents cleared the house, and now Adrian's mother's name appeared on the screen. Constance Ravenshire, calling the woman who'd just destroyed her son's freedom. "Don't answer it," Nathan said immediately. "Actually," Agent Webb corrected, "answer it. Put it on speaker. We need documentation of any threats or attempted witness intimidation. Evelyn's hand trembled as she accepted the call, pressing the speaker button. Constance Ravenshear's voice filled the conservatory, cultured, controlled, carrying the absolute certainty of women born into dynasties that trained them to view other humans as either assets or obstacles. Miss Carter, how unfortunate that we're speaking under these circumstances. The politeness was worse than any threat. Evelyn had learned that wealthy people weaponized courtesy, deploying it as preliminary warning before real violence. Mrs. Ravenshear, Evelyn managed. You've made some very serious accusations against my son. Constance's tone remained conversational. Accusations that will destroy not just Adrian, but everyone connected to him, including you and your unborn child. I assume you understand that. Agent Webb leaned forward, mouthing instructions. Keep her talking. Get her to threaten you directly. I told the truth, Evelyn said quietly. About Catherine. About the other women. About everything Adrian did. The truth. Constance's laugh carried no humor. Darling, truth is a luxury poor people indulge in because they have nothing else to trade. My family built our fortune understanding that reality is malleable for people with sufficient resources. Adrian made mistakes, certainly. He was careless. But mistakes can be corrected if everyone involved understands their incentives properly. What does that mean? Evelyn asked, though she already knew. This was negotiation. This was Constance offering money for silence, wealth for complicity, comfort in exchange for allowing a murderer to walk free. It means you'll reconsider your statement to federal authorities. Constance's voice hardened slightly. You'll acknowledge that pregnancy hormones created confusion, that Adrian never actually confessed to anything, that you misinterpreted his dark humor as literal admission. In exchange, the trust fund Adrian mentioned will be increased substantially. $10 million. Enough to give your daughter every advantage money can provide. Enough to ensure she never wants for anything material her entire life. Agent Webb was recording everything, his expression carefully neutral. This was exactly the kind of blatant witness tampering that would add years to whatever sentences prosecutors eventually secured. And if I refuse? Evelyn asked. She needed to hear it directly, needed Constance to articulate the threats she was clearly implying. Then, we destroy you. Constance's courtesy evaporated, revealing the calculation beneath. My lawyers will paint you as mentally unstable. We have psychiatrists ready to testify about your delusional episodes. We'll produce evidence of drug use during pregnancy. We'll contact Child Protective Services with concerns about your fitness as a mother. By the time we're finished, you'll be lucky to have supervised visitation rights. And your daughter will be raised by Adrian's family while you watch from whichever trailer park you end up inhabiting. The threats landed with surgical precision. Constance had clearly deployed this particular strategy before, terrifying women into silence by threatening their children, by demonstrating that maternal instinct could be weaponized against mothers who dared challenge patriarchal power. Are you threatening Ms. Carter's parental rights? Agent Webb interjected, his voice carrying official authority now. Because that's federal witness intimidation, Mrs. Ravenshear. Felony charges that will implicate you directly in obstruction of justice. Silence stretched across the phone line. When Constance spoke again, her tone had shifted back to that dangerous courtesy. I'm simply explaining reality to a young woman who seems confused about consequences. My attorneys will be in touch regarding custody arrangements and appropriate settlement terms. Good day, Miss Carter. The line went dead. Evelyn set the phone down with shaking hands, her daughter kicking frantically inside her like she was trying to fight her way free of this nightmare before birth forced her into it. That was incredibly helpful, Agent Webb said with grim satisfaction. Direct witness intimidation, threatened use of child custody as leverage, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Mrs. Ravenshear just implicated herself in multiple federal crimes. But they'll do it anyway, Evelyn whispered. Everything she threatened. They have the money and connections to make it happen regardless of federal charges. Which is why we're putting you in witness protection immediately. Agent Webb stood, already pulling out his phone to make arrangements. You'll be relocated to a secure facility until trial. New identity if necessary. Federal marshals providing security. The Ravenshears are powerful, but they don't control the entire justice system. Not yet. Nathan reached across the table, his hand covering Evelyn's. You did the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you stopped a serial killer. You exposed corruption that's been festering for decades. That matters. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that truth and justice and all those abstract concepts people invoked actually meant something in confrontations between the powerful and powerless. But she'd spent 3 years watching Adrian operate, learning how easily wealth converted into immunity, how systematically institutions protected men born into the right families. The conservatory doors burst open. A younger federal agent entered at speed, his expression urgent. "We have a problem. Adrian Ravenshire posted bail 20 minutes ago." Agent Webb's face darkened. "That's impossible. Federal magistrates set bail at $50 million specifically because he's a flight risk. His family paid it." The agent held up his phone, showing a news alert. "Full amount, cash. Posted by Constance Ravenshire through family attorneys. Adrian's already been released pending trial." The words seemed to arrive from very far away. Evelyn heard them through layers of shock and terror and exhausted resignation. Of course, Adrian was free. Of course, $50 million meant nothing to a family that measured wealth in generations rather than bank statements. Of course, the system that Agent Webb insisted would protect her had already bent itself around Ravenshire money, like gravity warping spacetime. "We need to move her now," Agent Webb said sharply. "Nathan, you're coming too. Anyone Adrian perceives as a threat is in immediate danger." They rushed Evelyn toward a waiting federal vehicle, agents forming a protective perimeter around her. Through the chaos, she glimpsed news vans gathering at the estate's gates, cameras filming everything, reporters shouting questions about Adrian Ravenshire's arrest and dramatic release. This was already becoming the story Nathan would eventually publish, the scandal that would dominate news cycles for weeks. But stories and scandals meant nothing to women trapped in the immediate violence of powerful men seeking revenge. The federal vehicle was armored, windows tinted, interior configured for witness protection transport. Agent Webb climbed in beside Evelyn while 2 other agents took positions in front. Nathan followed in a separate car, his journalist instincts clearly warring with legitimate fear about what Adrian might do now that he'd been publicly humiliated. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked as the vehicle accelerated away from the estate. "Federal safe house in New Jersey." Agent Webb was already on his phone, coordinating with other agents. "Armed guards. Secure location. You'll be there until we can arrange more permanent protection or until trial begins." "When will that be?" "Federal murder cases take months to build properly." Agent Webb's expression carried apology he couldn't quite voice. "Maybe a year. Maybe longer if Adrian's attorneys deploy delay tactics." "A year." Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick and turn. A year of hiding while the Ravenshire family deployed every resource to destroy her credibility and ensure Adrian walked free. A year of federal protection that would end the moment trial concluded, leaving her vulnerable to revenge from a man who'd already murdered 4 women and would absolutely add her to that count if given opportunity. "They can't protect you forever," Adrian had said once during an argument she'd nearly forgotten. "Power isn't about immediate force. It's about patience, about waiting until protection ends and opportunities present themselves. That's how dynasties survive challenges. We simply outlast our enemies." The federal vehicle merged onto highway traffic, blending into the anonymous flow of vehicles heading toward New Jersey and temporary safety that both of them knew was a polite fiction wealthy families would eventually penetrate. Evelyn's phone buzzed, text message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it despite Agent Webb's sharp warning not to engage with unknown contacts. The message contained a single photograph. Adrian standing outside the federal courthouse, surrounded by expensive attorneys, his expression carrying that same cold calculation she'd seen on the driveway hours ago. Below the image, 3 words: "This isn't over." Agent Webb snatched the phone, examining the message with professional fury. He's threatening a federal witness. That's another felony. "Will it matter?" Evelyn asked quietly. "How many felonies do people with $50 million in cash need to commit before consequences actually stick?" Agent Webb had no answer. They drove in silence toward New Jersey while behind them, Adrian Ravenshire stood free on Manhattan streets, already mobilizing the machinery that would transform his arrest from career-ending scandal into minor inconvenience wealthy families absorbed on their way to greater power. The federal safe house occupied a nondescript colonial in suburban New Jersey, the kind of house that disappeared into neighborhoods specifically because of its aggressive normality. Armed federal marshals secured the perimeter. Surveillance equipment monitored every approach. The interior had been stripped of personality, configured purely for function, protecting witnesses wealthy families wanted dead. Evelyn barely registered the security briefing. Agent Webb's words washed over her in waves of procedure and protocol that felt increasingly abstract. She was 6 months pregnant, exhausted, terrified, and trapped in protective custody that would end eventually while Adrian's resources and hatred lasted forever. Nathan arrived an hour later, escorted by federal agents who'd verified his identity through multiple channels. He looked shaken in ways his investigative journalism career apparently hadn't prepared him for. Easy to expose corruption from behind computer screens and encrypted communications. Harder when the people you're exposing can afford to hire teams specifically tasked with eliminating threats. "How are you holding up?" Nathan asked, settling into one of the safe house's generic chairs. Evelyn almost laughed. How was she holding up? Her daughter's father was a serial killer. His family had just threatened to destroy her parental rights. She was in witness protection facing a year or more of isolation before a trial that might not even convict given the Ravenshire family's institutional power. "I'm alive," she managed. "That's more than Catherine or the others got." Nathan pulled out his laptop, opening files that showed the breadth of his investigation. "I've been tracking Adrian for 2 years. Started when a paralegal named Jessica Chen disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Her family insisted something was wrong, but police called it a botched robbery. Then I found connections between Jessica and Adrian through law firm records. Started digging deeper." The laptop screen filled with evidence Nathan had compiled. Financial records showing payments from Ravenshire accounts to offshore holdings after each death. Text messages between Adrian and various fixers whose services apparently included making problems disappear. Witness statements from people who'd seen Adrian with each woman shortly before their deaths. "Why didn't you go to police earlier?" Evelyn asked. Nathan's expression darkened. "I did?" Repeatedly. "But Adrian's family has deep connections throughout law enforcement. Every investigation got quietly buried, evidence disappeared, witnesses recanted after receiving visits from Ravenshire attorneys. I needed something incontrovertible. Your testimony and the documentation you found provided that." "So I'm bait." Evelyn heard the bitterness in her own voice. "You needed someone Adrian would confess to directly. You're a survivor who did something incredibly brave." Nathan met her gaze directly. "I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but what you did will save lives. Adrian won't kill again. The evidence is too overwhelming now. If he's convicted." Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick. "And if his family doesn't destroy my credibility first, and if federal protection actually lasts long enough. That's a lot of ifs for someone betting their daughter's safety." Silence settled over the safe house. Outside, federal marshals maintained their perimeter, while somewhere in Manhattan, Adrian Ravenshire sat in his penthouse, plotting revenge with resources that made Evelyn's protection seem quaint and temporary. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from that unknown number. This time, a news link. She clicked despite knowing she shouldn't. The article was already published on a gossip website known for trafficking in elite scandal. The headline made her stomach drop. "Mystery woman behind Ravenshire arrest has history of psychiatric episodes, sources claim." The story painted Evelyn as mentally unstable, quoted anonymous sources describing her delusional behavior, included details about supposed drug use during pregnancy that were complete fabrications but presented as verified facts. The piece concluded with implications that she'd invented abuse allegations to extort money from Adrian after he tried to end their affair responsibly. "They're already destroying you," Nathan said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "Character assassination before trial even begins, classic wealth defense strategy. Can they do this?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "Just publish lies? First Amendment protections are incredibly broad." Nathan's expression carried the frustration of journalists who understood how easily their profession's freedoms got weaponized. "They'll face defamation lawsuits eventually, but that takes years. By then the damage is done. Public opinion turns against you. Jury pools get contaminated. Even if Adrian's convicted, the narrative becomes about a delusional mistress who manipulated the justice system. So I'm already destroyed." Evelyn set the phone down, too exhausted for anger. They win regardless of trial outcome. Not if we control the narrative. Nathan opened a new document on his laptop. I've been drafting an article for the Times, your full story, Adrian's confessions, the pattern of deaths, everything that makes his guilt incontrovertible. If we publish before his attorneys fully mobilize their smear campaign, we can shape public understanding. Agent Webb had been monitoring the conversation from across the room. He interjected now, his tone cautious. Publishing that article could compromise federal prosecution. Defense attorneys will claim you contaminated jury pools and prevented fair trial. Fair trial? Nathan's laugh carried no humor. Adrian just posted $50 million in bail, and his family is already destroying the primary witness. Fairness isn't a variable in this equation. Power is. If we don't get ahead of their narrative, Evelyn becomes the villain and Adrian walks free. The debate continued, but Evelyn stopped listening. She understood with sudden clarity that this was her life now, being fought over by institutions and interests that viewed her primarily as evidence or obstacle. The federal agents wanted to protect their case. Nathan wanted his story. Adrian wanted her destroyed or dead. Everyone had agendas that involved her survival or destruction based on how it served their goals. Her daughter kicked hard, sharp pain beneath her ribs. The baby had no agenda, no institutional interest, just basic biological imperative to be born into a world that wouldn't immediately destroy her. Publish it, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the argument between Nathan and Agent Webb. The article. Publish everything. If I'm going to be destroyed anyway, at least people should know the truth first. Nathan met her gaze, something like respect flickering in his expression. Are you sure? Once this is public, there's no going back. Adrian's family will deploy every resource against you. The harassment will be relentless. It's already relentless. Evelyn gestured at her phone where the smear article still glowed. They've already decided to destroy me. Might as well make it costly for them. Agent Webb looked like he wanted to object, but recognized futility when he saw it. I'll need to notify federal prosecutors. They're not going to be happy. No one's happy. Nathan was already pulling up his article, preparing it for publication. That's how you know we're doing something that matters. Everyone's comfortable when injustice remains hidden. Truth is what makes powerful people uncomfortable. He spent the next hour finalizing details while Evelyn provided additional confirmation of facts. The article was comprehensive, documenting Catherine's death, the paralegal, the graduate student, the pattern of violence Adrian had deployed across a decade. It included excerpts from Evelyn's testimony, photographs of evidence she'd found in Adrian's study, expert analysis suggesting the deaths were statistically impossible as coincidence. When Nathan finally hit publish, the article went live on the New York Times website with a headline that would dominate news cycles for weeks: Serial Killer or Duke? Inside Adrian Ravenshire's decade of violence against women. Within minutes, the story exploded across social media. News networks picked it up. Politicians who'd accepted Ravenshire campaign donations scrambled to distance themselves. The scandal metastasized with viral velocity that suggested people had been waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to say what everyone suspected about how wealthy families operated. But virality meant exposure. As the article spread, so did Evelyn's name and story. Within an hour, conservative media outlets were running counter-narratives painting her as money-hungry mistress who'd seduced a powerful man, then invented abuse claims when he tried to end their affair responsibly. Her face appeared on television screens across the country, dissected and judged by people who'd never met her but had strong opinions about her credibility. Agent Webb monitored the media storm with professional concern. This changes the security profile significantly. You're now a nationally recognizable witness. Makes protection more complicated. More complicated meaning what? Evelyn asked. Meaning Adrian's family has more vectors for harassment. Meaning public pressure could influence jury pools either direction. Meaning this case is no longer a simple murder prosecution. It's a cultural referendum on whether we believe women who accuse powerful men. The weight of that statement settled over the safe house. Evelyn hadn't just accused Adrian of murder. She'd challenged an entire system that had protected men like him for centuries. The machinery mobilizing against her wasn't just one family's revenge. It was institutional defense of hierarchy itself. Her phone exploded with notifications. Messages from reporters requesting interviews. Threats from Adrian's supporters calling her whore and liar. support from women's advocacy groups promising resources and protection, marriage proposals from men who apparently found pregnant, vulnerable women especially appealing. The digital chaos felt like drowning in other people's agendas, while her own survival remained uncertain. Nathan helped her disable most notifications, keeping only verified contacts active. But the messages kept arriving, relentless as tide, demonstrating how thoroughly her private nightmare had transformed into public spectacle. That night, Evelyn lay awake in the safe house's generic bedroom, feeling her daughter move inside her, while armed federal marshals patrolled outside. The baby would be born into this chaos, would grow up either defined by her father's crimes or destroyed by proximity to them. Either outcome seemed unbearable. Through thin walls, she heard Nathan on his phone with editors, discussing follow-up articles and maintaining narrative momentum. Agent Webb coordinated with federal prosecutors about trial strategy and witness preparation. Everyone busy with the machinery of justice and journalism, while Evelyn simply tried to figure out how to survive until morning. Her phone buzzed. Message from that persistent unknown number. Against better judgment, she opened it. This time no photograph, just text. You think you've won. You think exposure equals safety, but fame is just another kind of vulnerability. Ask Catherine. She was famous too, briefly, before her brakes failed. Sleep well, Evelyn. The threat was clear. Adrian had killed his wife despite public scrutiny, would kill Evelyn despite federal protection and national attention. Because wealthy men had learned across centuries that consequences were optional if you had sufficient resources and patience. Evelyn forwarded the message to Agent Webb, who responded immediately with assurances about enhanced security and warrant applications for phone records. But they both knew the truth. Threats were theater. Real violence came without warning, deployed by professionals who understood how to make murders look like accidents even under federal protection. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick. 3 more months until birth. 3 more months of carrying this tiny person who depended entirely on her mother's ability to survive men who'd refined killing into an institutional art form. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Not for her, probably. Just ordinary crime in ordinary New Jersey. But every sound felt like threat now. Every car engine, every footstep, every moment of silence that might be the pause before violence arrived. This was her life now. This permanent state of heightened awareness and exhausted terror, this understanding that she'd traded anonymous victimhood for famous vulnerability, that she'd survive either as cautionary tale or inspiration depending entirely on whether Adrian's family succeeded in killing her before trial, forced some kind of accountability. The next morning brought new developments. Adrian's attorneys filed motions to dismiss based on improper arrest procedures. Conservative commentators were calling the case a witch hunt against successful men. Liberal outlets championed Evelyn as symbol of women finally being believed. Politicians positioned themselves on either side, depending on their donor bases and electoral calculus. The trial hadn't even begun, but already the case had transformed into cultural battleground, where Evelyn's life mattered primarily as ammunition for larger ideological warfare. Nathan arrived early, carrying newspapers that all featured Adrian's arrest as front-page news. Some painted him as monster, others as victim of vindictive woman. None seemed particularly interested in factual accuracy over narrative momentum. "How are you feeling?" Nathan asked, the question absurd given circumstances but necessary for maintaining some pretense of normalcy. "Like I'm watching my own life happen to someone else." Evelyn gestured at the newspapers. "That person they're writing about, the delusional mistress or brave survivor or money-hungry seductress, depending on which paper you read. None of them are actually me." "Who are you?" Nathan asked quietly. Evelyn considered the question. Who was she? A waitress from Queens who'd believed a wealthy man's promises? A mother trying to protect her unborn daughter? A witness whose testimony might convict a serial killer or might get her killed before trial? A symbol for causes she'd never chosen to represent? "I'm tired," she said finally. "That's who I am. A tired, pregnant woman who wants to survive long enough to see her daughter born." Agent Webb joined them, his expression carrying news that clearly wasn't good. "Federal prosecutors want to meet with you this afternoon. They're concerned about the publicity. They need to assess whether you can withstand cross-examination given media attacks on your credibility." "They're already doubting me." Evelyn heard the flatness in her own voice. Even the people supposedly protecting me are questioning whether I'm believable enough. It's not about belief, Agent Webb corrected carefully. It's about jury perception. Defense attorneys will use every media attack against you. Federal prosecutors need to know you can handle that pressure without breaking down on the witness stand. So I have to prove I'm strong enough to be destroyed publicly. That's the qualification for getting justice? Welcome to the American legal system. Nathan's bitterness matched her own. Where wealthy defendants get bail and expensive attorneys and sympathetic media coverage. Where witnesses get protective custody and character assassination and the privilege of proving they're credible enough to deserve belief. The afternoon meeting with federal prosecutors happened via secure video conference. 2 attorneys appeared on screen, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Chen and a man slightly older named Robert Matthews. Both carried themselves with that particular exhaustion of public servants fighting underfunded battles against defendants who could outspend entire federal departments. Ms. Carter, thank you for speaking with us. Sarah Chen's voice was professional, but not unkind. We need to discuss trial strategy and prepare you for what's coming. Evelyn nodded, too tired to do more than that. Adrian Ravenshire's defense team is already filing preliminary motions. Robert Matthews pulled up documents on his screen. They're challenging evidence admissibility, arguing federal overreach, claiming improper arrest procedures. Standard wealthy defendant strategy. Delay trial as long as possible while destroying witness credibility. How long can they delay? Evelyn asked. Evelyn, months. Maybe years if they're persistent. Sarah Chen's expression carried apology. Murder trials involving prominent families tend to stretch timelines. They'll file appeal after appeal, challenge every procedural detail, use every legal mechanism to postpone accountability. Years. Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly. Years of living in fear while Adrian walked free on bail. Years of media attacks and legal warfare. Years of her daughter growing up under threat from the man whose DNA she carried. We're fighting for expedited trial dates, Robert Matthews added, but realistically, you should prepare for this to dominate your life for the foreseeable future. It already dominates my life. Evelyn gestured at the safe house around her. I'm in protective custody. I can't work, can't go home, can't do anything except wait for trial and hope Adrian doesn't find a way to kill me first. We're aware the situation is difficult. Sarah Chen chose her words carefully. But we need to know you can withstand the pressure. Defense attorneys will argue you invented abuse claims to extort money. They'll point to the trust fund Adrian offered as proof you were motivated by greed rather than justice. They'll paint your relationship as consensual affair that ended badly and you're seeking revenge. None of that is true. Truth and courtroom strategy often diverge. Robert Matthews leaned forward. Juries don't care about truth, they care about which narrative feels more believable. Rich Duke falling for beautiful waitress, or Rich Duke systematically murdering women across a decade. Which story confirms their existing biases about how the world works? So I'm doomed regardless. Evelyn heard defeat in her own voice. They'll destroy me on the witness stand even though everything I said is true. Not if we prepare you properly. Sarah Chen's expression hardened with determination. Evelyn recognized from women who'd spent careers fighting systems designed to defeat them. We'll anticipate every attack, practice responses to every character assassination, make you bulletproof before you ever take that stand. The confidence felt hollow. Bulletproof was just another word for sufficiently armored to survive being shot at. It still involved getting shot. The video conference continued for 3 hours. Federal prosecutors walking Evelyn through testimony they'd need, details they required, strategies for handling hostile cross-examination from attorneys whose careers involved making victims look like liars. By the end, Evelyn's head pounded, and her daughter kicked with distress that mirrored her mother's exhaustion. Nathan stayed after the prosecutors disconnected, his laptop open to articles he was drafting about federal prosecution strategy and wealthy defendant privilege. The journalism never stopped. The story continued regardless of how it destroyed the people living through it. You did well, Nathan offered. They're concerned, but I could tell they believe you. That matters. Does it? Evelyn asked. Because I'm starting to think belief is just another commodity wealthy families purchase. Adrian's attorneys will pay experts to testify I'm delusional. His family will pay media outlets to destroy my credibility. My belief matters exactly as much as their money allows it to. Nathan had no answer. They both understood she was right. The trial hadn't even begun, but already the outcome felt predetermined by resource disparity. Adrian had generations of wealth and institutional power. Evelyn had federal protection that would end eventually, and testimony everyone was preparing to question. That evening brought new crisis. Agent Webb burst into the safe house, his expression carrying the particular urgency that preceded bad news. "We have a situation. Adrian's attorneys just filed motion to establish paternity and sue for custody of your unborn child." The words took a moment to penetrate. When they did, Evelyn felt her world tilt. "They're trying to take my daughter?" "They're arguing that Adrian has parental rights regardless of criminal charges." Agent Webb pulled up legal documents on his phone. "They're claiming you're unstable and currently in federal custody, which makes you unfit parent. They're requesting court order placing the child with Adrian's family immediately upon birth." "But he's a murderer." Evelyn's voice rose despite attempts at control. "He killed his wife. He killed 3 other women. How can any judge give him custody? He hasn't been convicted yet, and until trial concludes, legally he's innocent." Agent Webb's expression carried frustrated awareness of how thoroughly the system protected wealth. His attorneys are using that presumption of innocence to establish parental rights before conviction eliminates them. Nathan looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. This is exactly what Constance threatened on that phone call. They're weaponizing motherhood against you. Evelyn stood pacing the small room despite her pregnancy making movement difficult. Her daughter kicked frantically, as if sensing the threat closing around both of them. Born into custody of her father's family, raised by people who'd already murdered multiple women and would absolutely ensure this child grew up believing her mother was a delusional liar who'd invented abuse for money. "Can they actually win?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Rich families didn't file motions they expected to lose. Adrian's attorneys had researched this strategy, confirmed its viability, determined that custody battles were winnable even when the father was awaiting murder trial. "It's complicated." Agent Webb chose his words carefully. "Federal witness protection complicates custody determinations. You're under government protection, which defense attorneys are painting as inability to provide stable home. Combine that with their character attacks and medical experts they'll pay to question your mental stability. They might actually win." Evelyn completed the thought he was avoiding. "They might take my daughter before she's even born, and there's nothing I can do about it." "We're coordinating with family law attorneys," Agent Webb offered. "Federal prosecutors are prepared to argue that granting custody to someone awaiting murder trial sets dangerous precedent. But custody cases move through different courts than criminal trials. Different judges, different standards of evidence." The machinery was already in motion. Legal mechanisms that would determine her daughter's fate regardless of whether Adrian was eventually convicted. Even if trial concluded with guilty verdict, custody might already be established by then. Evelyn could spend decades fighting to reclaim parental rights, while her daughter grew up believing the monster who'd killed her father's first wife was actually victim of vindictive mother's lies. "I need air." Evelyn moved toward the door despite Agent Webb's immediate objection. She needed out of this suffocating safe house that was supposed to protect her but felt increasingly like just another prison. "You can't leave," Agent Webb said firmly. "Adrian's family knows about this custody filing. They're probably hoping you'll panic and make yourself vulnerable. So I'm trapped here while they destroy my parental rights through legal mechanisms I can't afford to fight properly." Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick with distress that mirrored her own. "This is the choice? Stay protected and lose custody, or leave protection and get killed? There are no good choices when you're fighting people with generational wealth." Nathan's voice carried bitter understanding of how thoroughly money warped every system supposedly designed for justice. Just choices about which destruction you can survive. Evelyn sank back into the generic chair, too exhausted and pregnant and terrified to do anything except sit, while other people debated strategy for managing the newest crisis in her ongoing destruction. Her phone buzzed. Message from unknown number. She opened it, despite Agent Webb's sharp warning, needing to see whatever fresh threat Adrian's family was deploying. The message contained legal documents, custody filing in excruciating detail, expert psychiatric testimony painting Evelyn as delusional and unstable, character witnesses describing her erratic behavior, medical records from doctors she'd never seen prescribing medications she'd never taken. The fabrication was comprehensive, professional, exactly the kind of careful construction wealthy families deployed to make lies look like truth. Below the documents, a new message. Your daughter deserves better than a mother living in federal witness protection while making delusional accusations. Sign custody over voluntarily or watch judges award it anyway. Either way, she's ours. The threat was clear. The Ravenshire family would take her daughter regardless of Evelyn's resistance. The only question was whether she surrendered gracefully or fought and lost anyway while accumulating legal debts that would haunt her the rest of her life. Evelyn looked at Nathan and Agent Webb, both exhausted from fighting battles that had barely begun. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick like she was already trying to escape the trap she'd been born into. Tomorrow she had custody hearing. Next week was trial prep. Next month was her due date. Somewhere in that timeline, Adrian's family would find the opening they needed to either destroy her completely or eliminate her permanently. And Evelyn was starting to understand that survival might mean accepting custody loss now to stay alive long enough to fight for her daughter later. That maternal love sometimes meant tactical surrender when the alternative was getting killed and losing everything anyway. But surrender felt like death, like betrayal of the daughter kicking inside her, like admission that wealthy families were right, that power ultimately determined outcomes, that justice was luxury purchased by people who could afford expensive attorneys, that women who challenged dynasties simply got destroyed with clinical efficiency. Outside, night was falling over New Jersey. Federal marshals maintained their perimeter. Somewhere in Manhattan, Adrian sat free in his penthouse, coordinating his defense with attorneys whose fees exceeded most people's annual income. The machinery of his vindication was already in motion while Evelyn sat in protective custody, preparing to lose her daughter to the family that had threatened to make her disappear permanently. This was the war Nathan had warned her about. Not just legal proceedings, but comprehensive assault designed to break her completely before trial even began. The Ravenshire family wasn't just fighting criminal charges. They were fighting to maintain the system that allowed wealthy men to murder women without consequence. And Evelyn was just the latest casualty in a war that had been raging for generations. A war she'd stumbled into by believing a powerful man's promises and was now trapped in with no exit except destruction or death. Her daughter kicked hard one final time before settling into stillness that felt ominous. Like even the baby understood they'd reached the point where every choice led to loss, where survival meant accepting damage and hoping it wasn't fatal. Tomorrow would bring the custody hearing. Whatever happened there would determine whether Evelyn fought for her daughter from freedom or from whatever legal limbo Adrian's family managed to trap her in. But tonight, she sat in federal protection, feeling her daughter move and understanding that love alone wasn't enough to protect children from systems designed to benefit people born into the right families. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the real war began. Tonight, she held her daughter close and waited for dawn to arrive with whatever destruction it would bring. The custody hearing began at 9 a.m. in a Manhattan family court that smelled like desperation and furniture polish. Evelyn sat beside her court-appointed attorney, a tired woman named Lisa Park, who'd been assigned her case exactly 48 hours ago and clearly lacked the resources to fight Ravenshire money properly. Across the aisle, Adrian's legal team occupied an entire row. 5 attorneys in suits that cost more than Evelyn's annual waitressing income used to be, each one radiating the particular confidence of people who'd never lost cases because losing wasn't something their clients paid them to do. Adrian himself sat at the center of that expensive formation, his expression carefully composed into wounded father, concerned for his unborn child's welfare. He'd dressed down slightly, still expensive but less ostentatious, playing the role of reasonable man forced into unpleasant legal action by unstable ex-lover. The performance was flawless. If Evelyn hadn't heard him confess to murder directly, she might have believed it herself. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Miriam Holt, her face carrying the particular weariness of family court judges who'd spent decades mediating custody battles between people who'd once loved each other enough to create children together. She examined the case files with the expression of someone already exhausted by whatever fresh horror this hearing would reveal. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding custody of unborn minor," Judge Holt began, her voice carrying bureaucratic efficiency. Mr. Ravenshire is seeking temporary custody upon birth pending resolution of unrelated criminal proceedings. Ms. Carter opposes. Mr. Chen, you may present opening arguments. Adrian's lead attorney stood. David Chen was 60-something, gray-haired, carrying himself with the authority of someone who'd spent 4 decades winning cases for wealthy clients. His opening statement was surgical, each word chosen to build a narrative where Adrian was victim and Evelyn was unstable woman making false accusations. Your Honor, this case concerns the welfare of an innocent child about to be born into chaotic circumstances. Mr. Ravenshire acknowledges paternity and seeks to provide stable, secure environment for his daughter. Ms. Carter, unfortunately, has demonstrated pattern of instability, including making serious criminal accusations against the child's father, living currently in federal witness protection due to paranoid fears, and exhibiting behavior consistent with severe psychiatric distress. Chen gestured to documents his team had prepared. We have expert psychiatric testimony indicating Ms. Carter has experienced delusional episodes consistent with erotomania, a condition where individuals believe powerful figures are romantically obsessed with them. We have medical records suggesting substance abuse during pregnancy. We have character witnesses describing increasingly erratic behavior. Most troubling, Ms. Carter is currently unable to provide stable home environment, as she resides in federal safe house due to unfounded fears that Mr. Ravenshire poses danger to her. The fabrication was comprehensive. Evelyn sat listening to her life being rewritten by people who'd never met her, watching judges and court staff absorb lies presented as medical fact. Her court-appointed attorney objected weakly to characterizations, but lacked resources to meaningfully counter the avalanche of false documentation Adrian's team had assembled. When Lisa Park stood to present Evelyn's case, her opening was brief and noticeably less confident. Your Honor, Ms. Carter is a victim of domestic violence who has cooperated fully with federal investigators. She resides in protective custody because legitimate threats have been made against her life. The criminal accusations she's made are currently under federal prosecution, suggesting they have merit beyond personal vendetta. Granting custody to someone awaiting trial for multiple homicides sets dangerous precedent. Judge Holt's expression suggested she'd heard similar arguments countless times. Preliminary hearings weren't about determining guilt in criminal matters. They were about immediate child welfare. And on that narrow question, Adrian's attorneys had constructed a narrative where Evelyn appeared dangerously unstable, while Adrian seemed like concerned father seeking to protect his daughter from maternal chaos. The hearing proceeded with that particular efficiency of legal proceedings where outcomes feel predetermined. Adrian's attorneys called expert witnesses who'd never met Evelyn but testified confidently about her psychiatric instability. They presented medical records from doctors she'd never seen. They played recorded phone calls where Evelyn supposedly made threats against Adrian, audio that was clearly manipulated but presented as authentic evidence. Lisa Park objected repeatedly, but lacked the forensic resources to prove fabrication. Budget overload meant court-appointed attorneys fought with one hand behind their backs against opponents who could afford entire investigative teams. When Evelyn finally took the stand for her own testimony, Chen's cross-examination was brutal. He walked her through her relationship with Adrian, forcing her to acknowledge she'd been his mistress for 3 years. He questioned her memory of conversations, suggesting pregnancy hormones had distorted her recollection. He pointed out that she had no physical evidence of threats beyond messages from unknown numbers that could have been sent by anyone. Ms. Carter, isn't it true you've been living rent-free in property owned by Mr. Ravenshire? Chen's voice carried false sympathy designed to make his attack seem like reluctant necessity. Yes, Evelyn admitted quietly. And isn't it true Mr. Ravenshire offered you substantial financial settlement to relocate peacefully and co-parent your daughter? He offered me money to disappear, to sign away my daughter's right to know her father's identity. Or he offered reasonable support for a child he acknowledges is his, and you interpreted that generosity as conspiracy because it didn't include the marriage proposal you'd been hoping for? The question was designed to make her sound delusional and mercenary simultaneously. Evelyn tried to explain about Catherine's death, about the portfolio she'd found, about Adrian's direct confession, but Chen interrupted repeatedly, objecting to hearsay and speculation, forcing Judge Holt to sustain objections that prevented Evelyn from presenting the actual evidence of Adrian's crimes. By the time Evelyn left the witness stand, she felt thoroughly destroyed. Chen had made her sound like unstable woman who'd invented elaborate conspiracy theories because a wealthy man had tried to end their affair responsibly. The jury might eventually hear full evidence in criminal trial, but this judge only heard carefully curated narrative where Adrian was victim of false accusations. Judge Holt called a brief recess before ruling. Evelyn sat in the hallway with Lisa Park, both of them understanding they'd lost before the verdict was even announced. "I'm sorry," Lisa said quietly. "They have resources I can't match. Expert witnesses, fabricated evidence, media narrative already poisoning public opinion. Even if you're telling the truth about everything, family court doesn't have the investigative capacity to determine that quickly. So they win." Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick with the oblivious freedom of someone who didn't yet understand she was being fought over like property. "They take my baby? Probably temporary custody pending criminal trial resolution." Lisa's expression carried the exhaustion of public defenders who'd lost too many battles against wealthy opponents. But if Adrian is convicted in criminal court, you can appeal the custody ruling. Family court judges do reverse themselves when new evidence emerges, if he's convicted. If federal prosecutors can actually make charges stick against someone with generational wealth and institutional protection. If the trial happens before my daughter is already bonded with Adrian's family, and judges decide disrupting that bond would be harmful. The variables stacked against her felt insurmountable. Even if everything went perfectly in criminal proceedings, her daughter would spend months or years in custody of people who'd already murdered multiple women. What kind of damage would that cause? What kind of person would her daughter become if raised by monsters who taught her that power justified any violence? They returned to the courtroom for Judge Holt's ruling. The judge looked tired in ways that suggested she'd presided over too many custody battles between unequal opponents. This court acknowledges the serious nature of criminal accusations against Mr. Ravenshire. However, those accusations are pending in separate proceedings. This hearing concerns only immediate welfare of unborn minor. Based on evidence presented, this court finds that Ms. Carter currently lacks stable housing, is residing in federal protection due to unsubstantiated fears, and has exhibited behavior suggesting psychiatric instability that could endanger infant welfare. Evelyn felt the words like physical blows, each sentence another nail in the coffin of her parental rights. Therefore, this court grants temporary custody to Mr. Ravenshire upon birth of minor child, with supervised visitation rights for Ms. Carter pending psychiatric evaluation and establishment of stable housing. This ruling is preliminary and subject to modification based on outcome of pending criminal proceedings or new evidence regarding Ms. Carter's mental stability. The gavel came down. Just like that, Evelyn's daughter was legally Adrian's property the moment she was born. Federal protection that was supposed to keep her safe had been weaponized as evidence of her unfitness. The system designed to protect children had instead awarded custody to a man awaiting trial for murdering 4 women. Adrian's attorneys congratulated each other with muted satisfaction. Adrian himself caught Evelyn's gaze across the courtroom, his expression carrying victory without mercy. He'd won. Again. The way wealthy men always won when they mobilized sufficient resources against opponents too poor to fight properly. Lisa Park packed her files with defeated efficiency. "I'll file an appeal immediately." But realistically, appeals take months and your due date is weeks away. We're fighting against time and money and a system designed to favor stability over justice. Evelyn nodded numbly, too exhausted for response. She stood, her pregnant body heavy with the weight of carrying a daughter she'd already legally lost. Federal marshals moved to escort her back to protective custody, back to the safe house that had become evidence of her unfitness rather than protection from legitimate danger. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Cameras and microphones and reporters shouting questions about custody ruling and criminal accusations and whether she was actually delusional like Adrian's attorneys claimed. Nathan appeared through the chaos, his journalist instincts clearly at war with legitimate concern for someone he'd helped put in this position. "I'm sorry," Nathan said as federal marshals cleared path through the crowd. "I thought exposure would help. I didn't understand how thoroughly they could weaponize everything against you." "You gave me a chance," Evelyn replied quietly. "That's more than most people do for women in my situation." The federal vehicle was waiting. They drove back to New Jersey in silence, while news networks already broadcast analysis of the custody ruling, legal experts debating whether family courts should grant custody to people awaiting trial, talking heads arguing about whether Evelyn was brave survivor or delusional attention seeker. Her life dissected by people who'd never met her, reduced to debate fodder for programs that needed content to fill airtime between advertisements. Back at the safe house, Agent Webb was waiting with news that somehow made everything worse. We have a problem. Adrian's legal team just filed motion to compel you to surrender to hospital custody for psychiatric evaluation as condition of maintaining visitation rights. They want to institutionalize me. Evelyn heard the defeat in her own voice. Lock me in some facility where I can't prepare for trial or coordinate with federal prosecutors. They want to paint you as so unstable you can't be trusted with your own welfare. Agent Webb pulled up the legal filing on his phone. They've got doctors ready to testify. You need immediate intervention. If judge grants this motion, you'll be committed to psychiatric facility until you're deemed stable enough for supervised visits with your daughter. The trap was elegant. Either submit to institutional control, where Adrian's family could medicate and manipulate her into compliance, or resist and lose even supervised visitation rights. Either way, she was being systematically isolated from everyone who might help her survive until trial. Can they actually do this? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Rich people institutionalize inconvenient family members all the time. Agent Webb's expression carried frustrated awareness of how thoroughly wealth corrupted every system. Get the right doctors to sign the right paperwork, and suddenly involuntary commitment becomes legally sanctioned. You'd have to fight it from inside the institution, which is nearly impossible when the people evaluating your stability are the same ones being paid by the family that wants you committed. This is what Adrian threatened that first night in the conservatory. Evelyn remembered his casual description of Plan B, psychiatric commitment to ensure her silence. She'd thought federal protection would prevent it. Turned out federal protection was just a different kind of trap that made her look unstable while Adrian remained free. Nathan was on his phone, clearly trying to coordinate media response. This is outrageous. We need to publish everything about how they're weaponizing the medical system. Get public opinion behind you. Public opinion doesn't matter to family court judges. Agent Webb's voice carried the exhaustion of law enforcement officers who'd watched wealth pervert justice too many times. What matters is documentation and expert testimony and legal procedures that all favor people who can afford expensive attorneys. Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at suburban New Jersey streets where ordinary people lived ordinary lives without federal protection or custody battles, or men trying to institutionalize them. Her daughter kicked hard, as if protesting the injustice of being born into this nightmare. Her phone buzzed. Message from that persistent, unknown number. She opened it despite knowing she shouldn't, needing to see whatever fresh threat Adrian's family was deploying. The message contained a photograph. Not of her this time. Of Nathan Cole entering a Manhattan office building. Below the image, text that made her blood freeze. Your journalist friend just met with our attorneys. Ask him what they discussed. Ask him how much they offered. Ask him whether his commitment to truth survives financial incentive. Evelyn turned slowly to where Nathan stood across the safe house, still on his phone coordinating media strategy. The paranoia was instant and total. Had Adrian's family gotten to Nathan, bribed him, threatened him, convinced him that cooperating with the Ravenshire defense was more profitable than continuing to expose their crimes? Nathan ended his call, looking up to find Evelyn staring at him with expression that clearly registered her suspicion. What? His confusion seemed genuine, but wealthy families paid people to seem genuine. Tell me you didn't meet with Adrian's attorneys today. Nathan's face went carefully blank. That defensive neutrality people adopt when they've been caught doing something they know looks bad but insist isn't actually wrong. It was exploratory, Nathan said carefully. They reached out requesting interview. I thought I could gather information about their strategy. They offered you money. Evelyn's voice was flat. To stop publishing, to soften your coverage, to present both sides more fairly, or whatever euphemism they used for asking you to destroy me. They offered to provide exclusive access to Adrian's side of the story. Nathan set his phone down, his expression carrying defensive justification. Information I can use to write more comprehensive articles that expose their manipulation even more thoroughly. Or information they're feeding you to control the narrative. Evelyn felt her world narrowing further. First they took my daughter. Now they're taking the one person I thought was fighting for truth. I am fighting for truth. Nathan's voice rose. But journalism requires understanding all sides. I can't just write propaganda for your position and ignore that Adrian has his own version of events. His version is lies. His version is that I'm delusional. His version gets me institutionalized and my daughter raised by monsters. His version is what half the country believes because I didn't balance my reporting with his perspective. Nathan moved toward her, his expression carrying frustration mixed with something else, something that looked uncomfortably like doubt. You have to understand, I've been threatened. My editor has been threatened. The Times is getting legal pressure to retract articles. Adrian's family has resources to destroy my career if I don't at least pretend to engage with their narrative. So you're protecting your career while I lose my daughter. Evelyn heard the betrayal in her own voice. You published my story, made me nationally visible, then decided your professional reputation mattered more than my survival. That's not fair. I've risked everything to expose Adrian's crimes. But you're hedging now. Meeting with his attorneys, considering their information, preparing to write balanced coverage that presents my testimony and his lies as equally valid perspectives. The accusation hung between them while Agent Webb watched with professional assessment of how quickly ally relationships deteriorated under pressure from wealthy opponents determined to isolate their targets. Nathan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then back at Evelyn. It's my editor. Probably about legal threats from Ravenshire attorneys. I need to take this. He stepped outside, leaving Evelyn alone with Agent Webb and the growing certainty that she was losing every support system she'd thought would protect her. Federal prosecutors worried about case strength. Court-appointed attorney overwhelmed by resource disparity. Journalist whose commitment to truth was apparently negotiable when his career faced pressure. She was being systematically isolated while Adrian remained free with all his resources and connections intact. When Nathan returned, his expression confirmed everything Evelyn had feared. The Times legal department is demanding I provide Adrian's attorneys with list of confidential sources for fact-checking. They're threatening defamation lawsuit that could bankrupt the paper unless we cooperate with their investigation into our reporting. You're going to give them my name. Evelyn understood immediately. Tell them I was your source. Let them use that to further destroy my credibility. You're not confidential. You testified directly to federal agents. Nathan's defensive tone suggested he knew exactly how much he was rationalizing. But other sources, people inside the Ravenshire organization who provided financial documents, former employees who described Adrian's behavior, those people need protection. So you protect anonymous sources while sacrificing the one person who went public. The one person whose name and face are already all over the news taking all the risk. Nathan had no answer that wouldn't sound like excuse. They stood in the safe house while his phone continued buzzing with messages from attorneys and editors and sources, all the machinery of journalism that prioritized story over the human beings destroyed by it. I think you should leave, Evelyn said quietly. I can't trust anyone who's negotiating with Adrian's family while claiming to support me. Nathan looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he just nodded, grabbed his laptop, and left without another word. Just like that, the journalist who'd promised to expose Adrian's crimes had been compromised by legal pressure and career concerns. Another support system dissolved by the relentless pressure wealthy families applied to anyone threatening their interests. Agent Webb's phone rang. He stepped away to take the call, his expression darkening as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he returned, he carried news that completed Evelyn's isolation. Federal prosecutors are pulling back, Agent Webb said flatly. They've received communications from Justice Department officials suggesting prosecution of prominent families requires extraordinary evidence to avoid accusations of political persecution. They're asking us to delay arrest warrant execution until after election cycle. They're letting Adrian walk? Evelyn felt the last foundation crumbling beneath her. The federal government is just giving up? Not giving up, delaying. Agent Webb's expression carried the particular fury of law enforcement officers watching political considerations override justice. There are concerns about optics, about accusations that Justice Department targets wealthy conservatives, about campaign donors who happen to be friends with the Ravenshire family threatening to pull funding if prosecution seems too aggressive. So money wins. Again, power protects power, and everyone else just gets destroyed in the machinery. Agent Webb said nothing because there was nothing to say. They both understood how thoroughly the system had failed. Custody lost. Journalist compromised. Federal prosecution delayed indefinitely, while Adrian remained free on bail with full access to his resources and ability to threaten anyone who testified against him. Evelyn's phone buzzed one final time. Message from that unknown number. This time, just 2 words. Checkmate, sweetheart. The trap had closed completely. Adrian had won every battle through systematic application of resources she couldn't match. He'd taken her daughter through family courts, compromised her media support through legal threats, delayed criminal prosecution through political pressure, isolated her in protective custody that made her look unstable while he remained free. And Evelyn was beginning to understand that the only way to survive when you've lost every conventional avenue was to stop fighting conventionally. That wealthy families won when their opponents played by rules the wealthy had written. That justice through institutions was fantasy when institutions existed primarily to protect institutional power. Her daughter kicked hard beneath her ribs. 3 weeks until due date. 3 weeks until Adrian's family would take custody of this tiny person who'd never asked to be born into warfare between her parents. 3 weeks to figure out how to protect her daughter when every system designed to help had instead become weapon for her destruction. Agent Webb was coordinating with other marshals about enhanced security following the custody ruling. Nathan was presumably meeting with Times attorneys to discuss how much of Evelyn's story they could retract without admitting their reporting was wrong. Federal prosecutors were delaying their case indefinitely, while Adrian walked free and planned whatever revenge he'd settled on. Everyone busy with their institutional priorities, while Evelyn sat alone with her daughter, and the understanding that maternal love alone wasn't enough against generational wealth and political power. But maternal love was all she had left. That, and growing understanding that if institutions wouldn't protect her daughter, she'd need to find protection outside institutional channels. That survival sometimes required becoming the kind of person she'd never imagined being. That protecting children from monsters occasionally meant learning to be monstrous yourself. The thought was terrifying, but less terrifying than Adrian raising her daughter to believe power justified any violence, that women existed to be controlled, that her mother was a delusional liar who'd invented abuse for attention. Evelyn stood, her pregnant body heavy, but her mind crystallizing into something harder than fear. Agent Webb looked up from his coordination, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "I need to make a phone call," Evelyn said quietly. "Private, without federal monitoring." That's not protocol. Agent Webb's professional instincts were immediately alert. "All communications need to be documented for your protection. My protection has failed at every level. Courts took my daughter. Media abandoned me. Federal prosecutors are delaying indefinitely. At some point, institutional protection becomes just another kind of prison. You're talking about taking action outside legal channels." Agent Webb's expression carried warning she didn't care about anymore. "Whatever you're planning, it will compromise prosecution and probably get you killed. I'm already compromised, already isolated, already losing my daughter the moment she's born." Evelyn moved toward the door leading to the safe house's small backyard. "And I'm done letting wealthy men dictate the terms of my destruction." Agent Webb stood but didn't physically stop her. Professional training probably covered what to do when witnesses become uncooperative, but instinct understood that desperate mothers followed different calculations than rational actors worried about long-term legal strategy. Evelyn stepped outside into cold October air that smelled like dying leaves and approaching winter. Her breath fogged in the darkness, while somewhere in Manhattan, Adrian celebrated his victories and planned her final destruction with the patience of predators who'd never lost hunts. She pulled out her phone, blocking federal monitoring through methods Nathan had taught her weeks ago when they'd still trusted each other. Opened encrypted messaging app, typed an address she'd never thought she'd use, contact information for people who existed outside legal systems, who provided services institutions couldn't or wouldn't, who understood that justice sometimes required methods prosecutors would never approve. The message was simple: I need someone disappeared, permanently. I can't pay what it costs, but I have information that's valuable to people who want to destroy the Ravenshire family. I have 3 weeks before I lose everything. Tell me what you need. She hit send before wisdom could stop her. Watched the message disappear into encrypted channels where people who made problems vanish professionally conducted their business. Felt herself crossing lines she'd never imagined crossing, from victim seeking justice through proper channels to woman willing to become murderer herself, if that's what protecting her daughter required. The phone buzzed almost immediately, Response from someone whose name was just a string of random characters. Information first. Proof you have something valuable. Then we discuss terms. Evelyn moved back inside, past Agent Webb, who pretended not to notice she'd just done something that would horrify federal prosecutors if they knew. Went to her room, pulled up every file Nathan had gathered during his investigation, financial records showing Ravenshire family corruption, names of politicians who'd accepted bribes, details of campaign finance violations that extended beyond Adrian to his entire family network. She sent it all to the encrypted contact. Everything Nathan had compiled, everything federal prosecutors were too politically pressured to act on, everything that could destroy not just Adrian, but the entire dynasty he represented. The response came quickly. This is valuable, very valuable. We have clients who would pay substantial amounts for this information. But you want something more than money. I want Adrian Ravenshire dead before my daughter is born. I want it to look like accident. I want him gone permanently, so my daughter never has to know her father was a monster who would have destroyed her mother to maintain his power. There was a pause, long enough for Evelyn to understand the magnitude of what she'd just requested. She was hiring killers to murder her daughter's father, becoming exactly the kind of unstable, dangerous person Adrian's attorneys had painted her as, proving that maternal instinct could be just as murderous as masculine control when pushed far enough. The response arrived. Understood. This will require 1 week for planning, 2 weeks maximum for execution. Need to make it unquestionable accident to avoid investigation that might compromise our operation. In exchange for the information you've provided, standard fee is waived. Consider this professional courtesy between people who understand that institutional justice is fiction designed to protect wealth. 1 week. 2 maximum. That left 1 week before her due date. 1 week where Adrian would be alive and planning her destruction. 1 week where custody arrangements would stand and federal protection would continue pretending to keep her safe. Then Adrian would die in some tragic accident. Car crash. Heart attack. Whatever method professionals use to make murder look like misfortune. And Evelyn would be free. Her daughter would be free. The custody ruling would be moot because dead men don't raise children. She'd become murderer to protect her child. She'd crossed every line she'd believed was uncrossable. She'd proven that maternal love was more powerful than morality when survival required choosing between principles and protecting the helpless person depending entirely on her mother's willingness to become monstrous. Agent Webb knocked on her door. Federal prosecutors want to schedule video conference tomorrow. They're discussing witness preparation for eventual trial. Tell them I'm available whenever they need me, Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the line she'd just crossed. I want Adrian convicted. I want justice through proper channels. The lie came easily because she'd spent 3 years learning to perform for powerful men. One more performance wouldn't cost her anything she hadn't already lost. That night, Evelyn lay awake feeling her daughter move inside her while somewhere in encrypted channels, professionals planned Adrian's death with clinical efficiency. Tomorrow she'd pretend to cooperate with federal prosecutors. She'd maintain the performance of desperate woman seeking institutional justice. She'd let everyone believe she was a helpless victim waiting for systems to save her. But she'd learned what Adrian taught her across 3 years of systematic manipulation. That power wasn't about morality or justice or any abstract principle. Power was about willingness to do what others found unconscionable, about understanding that survival sometimes required becoming the monster you'd been running from. Her daughter kicked one final time before settling into sleep. 3 more weeks inside the womb. 3 more weeks of safety before birth forced her into a world that would immediately try to place her in custody of murderous family. Unless that family's heir died first. Unless maternal love proved stronger than generational wealth. Unless Evelyn demonstrated that sometimes the only way to protect children from monsters was learning to be more monstrous than the men trying to destroy you. Outside, federal marshals maintained their perimeter. In Manhattan, Adrian presumably slept peacefully in his penthouse, confident his victory was complete. Federal prosecutors prepared for trial that might never happen. Nathan struggled with whether to protect his career or his integrity. The machinery of justice and journalism and institutional power continued grinding forward with the efficiency of systems designed to protect wealth from consequence. But in a safe house in New Jersey, a pregnant woman had just hired killers to murder her child's father. And somewhere in encrypted channels, professionals were planning an execution that would look like accident when it happened. The war Adrian thought he'd won was just beginning. And he'd made one critical mistake. He'd taught Evelyn exactly how ruthless you needed to be to survive battles against people born into power. Now she was about to demonstrate that lesson in ways he'd never see coming until it was too late to matter. 3 weeks until everything changed. 3 weeks until her daughter was born into freedom instead of captivity. 3 weeks until Adrian Ravenshire learned that sometimes the women you destroy decide to destroy you back. And unlike him, Evelyn had nothing left to lose except the daughter she'd kill to protect. The professionals moved faster than Evelyn expected. Within 72 hours of her encrypted message, she received confirmation through channels that left no digital trace. Adrian Ravenshire's accident had been scheduled for precisely 6 days from now, during his evening commute from Manhattan to the Dutchess County estate. Brake failure on the Taconic Parkway. Same method he'd used on Catherine. The symmetry felt intentional, like the universe was finally remembering that gravity worked both directions. But 3 days into that countdown, everything collapsed. Agent Webb burst into the safe house at 4 a.m., his expression carrying the particular urgency that preceded catastrophic news. "We have a situation. Someone leaked your location to media. News vans are already gathering outside. We need to evacuate immediately." Evelyn struggled out of sleep, her pregnant body slow to respond despite adrenaline flooding her system. How? This location was classified federal protection. We're investigating. Agent Webb was already pulling bags from the closet, throwing her belongings inside with practiced efficiency. "But right now we need to move you before this becomes a media circus that compromises security further." Through the window, Evelyn could see headlights gathering in the pre-dawn darkness. News vans, camera crews, the machinery of public spectacle that had been following her story since Nathan first published his exposé. Someone had given them her location. Someone with access to federal protection details. Someone who understood that destroying her security was more effective than direct violence. Adrian. The realization landed with certainty. He'd penetrated federal protection through the same methods he penetrated every other institution. Money, connections, people whose loyalty was transactional rather than principled. He'd found someone inside the Marshal Service willing to leak for sufficient payment. Now he was forcing her out of protection and into public visibility where his hired professionals could operate more easily. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked as Agent Webb hustled her toward the back door where an unmarked vehicle waited. Secondary safe house in Pennsylvania. More remote. Fewer people with access to location details. Agent Webb's jaw was tight with fury at the breach. Someone inside compromised operational security. "We're conducting internal investigation, but that takes time you don't have." They moved through the darkness while camera crews swarmed the front of the house, reporters already going live with breaking news about federal witness protection breach. Evelyn glimpsed herself on someone's phone screen as they passed. Pregnant woman being rushed into federal vehicle, looking exactly as terrified and vulnerable as she felt. The Pennsylvania safe house was smaller, more isolated, tucked into Appalachian foothills where neighbors were sparse and suspicious of outsiders. Agent Webb's team swept for surveillance equipment before allowing Evelyn inside. The place smelled like dust and disuse, clearly a backup location maintained for emergencies exactly like this. "How long until Adrian finds this location too?" Evelyn asked as federal marshals established new security perimeter. Agent Webb's expression suggested he'd been wondering the same thing. "We've limited knowledge to essential personnel only. But if there's a mole inside the service, nowhere is completely secure. So I'm just moving from temporary safety to temporary safety until he gets lucky and the leak happens fast enough for his people to act on it. We're doing everything possible to protect you." Agent Webb's professionalism couldn't quite hide his awareness that everything possible wasn't necessarily enough against opponents with unlimited resources and institutional penetration. Evelyn's encrypted phone buzzed. Message from her professional contact. "Location breach complicates timeline. Subject is accelerating countermoves. Suggest you prepare for contingencies where original plan may not execute cleanly." The message was clear. Adrian knew something was coming. Maybe not specifics, but his paranoia was heightened enough that the professionals she'd hired were warning her their carefully planned accident might not work if the target was already suspicious and taking extra precautions. She typed back, "How long until you can guarantee success?" Response came immediately. Cannot guarantee anything against target who's actively defensive. Best option may be forcing him into position where he believes he's won. Lower his guard. Then execute when he's celebrating rather than paranoid. Forcing Adrian to believe he'd won meant surrendering what little protection she had left. Meant making herself vulnerable in ways that would give him opportunity to eliminate her first. The professionals were essentially asking her to be bait in her own rescue operation. Her daughter kicked hard, protesting the stress flooding her mother's system. 2 weeks until due date. 2 weeks where custody arrangements would be enforced the moment the baby was born, unless Adrian was dead first. 2 weeks to somehow maneuver a man who'd spent a decade successfully murdering women into position where hired killers could make his death look accidental. The mathematics of survival were becoming increasingly desperate. Agent Webb returned with news that accelerated everything. Federal prosecutors just called. They're moving trial date up. Apparently political pressure reversed. Some senator who's running against Ravenshire-backed candidates decided publicly prosecuting Adrian before election would be politically advantageous. Trial starts in 10 days. 10 days. Before her due date. Before the professionals could execute their plan. Before she'd figured out how to lower Adrian's guard enough for the accident to work. That's good, right? Evelyn tried to sound hopeful. Faster trial means faster resolution. Maybe conviction before the baby is born. Agent Webb's expression suggested he understood exactly how naive that hope was. Adrian's attorneys will request continuance. They'll argue insufficient preparation time. Even if judge denies it, 10 days isn't enough to present comprehensive murder case. Federal prosecutors are being rushed into trial before they're ready because politicians decided it serves electoral interests. So we're going to lose. The trial will happen too fast, prosecutors won't have time to build proper case, Adrian will be acquitted, and the custody arrangement will be permanent. I didn't say that, but Agent Webb's tone suggested that's exactly what he meant. He just had too much professional integrity to articulate it directly. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. This time a regular message, not encrypted. From a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was local to Manhattan. She opened it despite Agent Webb's sharp warning about engaging with unknown contacts. The message was from Constance Ravenshire. The text was brief, almost cordial. My dear, this has gone on long enough. You've lost custody. Federal prosecutors are rushing to trial in ways that ensure acquittal. The journalist who championed you has been compromised by legal pressure. Your protection is porous as evidenced by the location breach. You have nothing left to fight with. I'm offering one final opportunity for reasonable resolution. Meet with me tomorrow. Alone. We'll discuss terms that allow you to maintain some dignity and see your daughter occasionally, rather than losing everything completely. The address is attached. Come alone or don't come at all. This is your last chance to be part of your daughter's life in any capacity. The message included address for neutral location, a private attorney's office in Philadelphia, equidistant from the Pennsylvania safe house, and Manhattan. The meeting was designed to seem reasonable while actually being trap. Come alone, no federal protection, no witnesses. Just Evelyn and Constance in a room where anything could happen, and no one would know until it was too late. But it was also the opportunity the professionals had said they needed, a chance to make Adrian believe he'd won, lower his defenses, create opening for the accident they'd been planning. I need to take this meeting, Evelyn said quietly. Agent Webb's expression went from professional concern to outright alarm. That's a trap. Constance is luring you out of protection to eliminate you away from federal oversight. Probably. But it's also my only chance to make them think they've won. To get close enough to Adrian's family that he stops being paranoid and gives the people I hired an opening to complete the contract. The people you hired. Agent Webb's voice went flat. What people? What contract? Evelyn met his gaze directly, letting him see exactly how far she'd gone beyond institutional protection. I hired professionals to kill Adrian before my daughter is born. They need him vulnerable and celebrating rather than paranoid and defensive. This meeting with Constance gives me that opportunity. Jesus Christ. Agent Webb stood abruptly, pacing the small safe house with barely contained fury. You hired contract killers. You're planning to murder federal defendant before trial. Do you understand what you've done? If this comes out, you'll be charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Everything you've accomplished, all the evidence against Adrian, becomes inadmissible because primary witness is herself a murderer. I'm a mother protecting her child from someone who's already murdered 4 women and will absolutely kill me the moment he has opportunity. Evelyn's voice was steady, past the point where Agent Webb's institutional concerns mattered. Your federal protection has been breached. Your prosecutors are being rushed into trial they're not ready for. Your justice system gave custody of my daughter to a serial killer. At some point, institutional faith becomes delusion. Agent Webb stared at her like she'd revealed herself as someone completely different than the frightened pregnant woman he'd been protecting for weeks. Maybe she had. Maybe desperation had burned away everything except maternal survival instinct that cared nothing for law or morality or consequences beyond keeping her daughter alive. If you go to that meeting, I can't protect you, Agent Webb said finally. Federal protection doesn't extend to witnesses who deliberately put themselves in danger against explicit security guidance. You'll be on your own. I've been on my own since the custody hearing. Evelyn stood, her pregnant body heavy, but her mind crystallized into clarity that came from having nothing left to lose. Everything else has been performance of institutional protection that stopped working the moment Adrian posted bail. Agent Webb looked like he wanted to argue further but recognized futility when he saw it. You're going to get yourself killed, and your daughter will be raised by the family that murdered her father because you couldn't trust the system to eventually work. The system doesn't eventually work for people like me. Evelyn moved toward the bedroom where her few belongings had been hastily stored. It works for people like Adrian. People born into wealth and connections and institutional protection that bends every rule in their favor. Women like me just get destroyed efficiently, while people like you tell us to have faith in processes designed to eliminate us. She packed a small bag, practical clothes, the phone with encrypted contacts, documentation of everything she'd witnessed in case something went wrong and she needed evidence to survive whatever Constance was planning. The baby kicked repeatedly, as if understanding her mother was about to walk into danger that might leave her orphaned before birth even happened. Agent Webb made one final attempt. Let me at least send surveillance team. They'll maintain distance but have eyes on the meeting location. If something goes wrong, we can intervene. If something goes wrong, intervention won't matter. Evelyn turned to face him directly. Constance isn't stupid enough to kill me in a lawyer's office with witnesses. Whatever she's planning is more subtle. But I need to go because it's the only way to make Adrian think he's won. And that's the only way the people I hired can finish what I started. You mean murder? Agent Webb's voice carried defeated understanding. The only way contract killers can murder a federal defendant and make it look accidental enough that you're not immediately implicated. I mean protection. The kind that doesn't depend on institutions compromised by wealth. The kind that mothers provide when every system designed to help them fails. She called a car service using an app Nathan had showed her that couldn't be traced to federal accounts. The driver arrived 20 minutes later. Agent Webb watched her leave with expression that mixed concern with respect for someone who'd decided survival mattered more than rules. His entire career existed inside institutional frameworks. He couldn't imagine operating outside them. But Evelyn had learned what 3 years with Adrian taught her, that frameworks were cages built by powerful people to contain everyone else. The drive to Philadelphia took 90 minutes through Pennsylvania countryside, turning brown with approaching winter. Evelyn watched the landscape pass while her daughter kicked and turned inside her, blissfully unaware that her mother was driving toward confrontation that would determine both their futures. The attorney's office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone in Philadelphia's business district. Expensive but not ostentatious. The kind of location wealthy people used for meetings they wanted kept confidential. Evelyn climbed stairs that were harder than they should have been at 8 months pregnant, each step another commitment to the path she'd chosen. The receptionist was expecting her. Young woman whose professional courtesy couldn't quite hide her curiosity about the pregnant woman involved in the Ravenshire scandal every news outlet had been covering for weeks. She led Evelyn to a conference room where Constance Ravenshire waited with the particular patience of women who'd spent lifetimes perfecting the art of strategic cruelty. Constance looked exactly like the photographs, 60-something, impeccably dressed, carrying herself with the unconscious authority of someone who'd never questioned her right to control other people's lives. She stood as Evelyn entered, gesturing to a chair across the conference table. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming." Constance's voice carried false warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "I know this situation has been difficult for everyone involved. Your son murdered his wife." Evelyn saw no point in pretending this was civilized negotiation. He murdered at least 3 other women. He confessed directly to me. Nothing about this situation is difficult. It's monstrous. Constance's expression didn't change. She'd probably heard similar accusations countless times and learned to treat them as background noise rather than indictments requiring response. My son made mistakes, as all young men do when managing complicated personal relationships. But murder is a strong word for situations that were far more ambiguous than your testimony suggests. Catherine's brakes didn't fail ambiguously. They were sabotaged. Adrian told me directly. Adrian says many things under stress. Constance's tone remained conversational. He has vivid imagination and sometimes confuses dramatic storytelling with literal confession. That's very different from actually committing the crimes you've accused him of. The gaslighting was comprehensive, delivered with the smooth confidence of someone who'd spent decades rewriting reality to suit family interests. Evelyn understood this was preview of what trial would be like. Adrian's family systematically denying every piece of evidence, painting her as delusional and vindictive, using wealth to construct alternative narrative where their son was victim of false accusations. "Why am I here?" Evelyn asked bluntly. "You didn't invite me to Philadelphia to debate whether your son is a murderer." Constance smiled slightly. "I invited you because despite everything, you and I have shared interest. We both want what's best for the child you're carrying. My granddaughter deserves better than being born into this media circus, while her parents destroy each other through legal warfare. What are you offering?" Constance pulled out a document, sliding it across the polished conference table. "Complete financial security. $20 million in trust for you, separate from the child support arrangements. Full medical care. Private education for your daughter at whichever institutions you choose. In exchange, you recant your testimony. You acknowledge that pregnancy hormones and relationship stress caused you to misinterpret Adrian's behavior. You admit the accusations were mistakes born from emotional distress rather than actual crimes. You want me to call my daughter's father innocent of murder so your family can avoid consequences. I want you to accept reality." Constance's voice hardened slightly. "Adrian has the best attorneys money can buy. He has political connections throughout the justice system. He has resources to fight this for years while you exhaust whatever limited support you've managed to gather. You will lose eventually. The only question is whether you lose with $20 million and partial custody rights, or lose with nothing and spend the rest of your life watching your daughter raised by our family while you struggle to afford supervised visitation." The offer was designed to sound reasonable while actually being complete capitulation. Take the money. Abandon justice. Let Adrian walk free to kill again. Accept that wealth-purchased immunity from consequence. Evelyn looked at the document without touching it. The numbers were staggering. $20 million was generational wealth, security her daughter would never otherwise have. Freedom from the financial precarity that had defined Evelyn's entire life before meeting Adrian. But it required calling a serial killer innocent, required teaching her daughter that justice was optional when sufficiently wealthy people wanted it ignored, required accepting that some lives mattered less than others based purely on who had resources to make problems disappear. "I need to think about it," Evelyn said finally. "This is a significant decision. You have until tonight." Constance stood, clearly considering the meeting concluded. Adrian's trial begins in 9 days. Federal prosecutors need to finalize witness lists. If you're recanting, they need to know immediately so they can adjust their case strategy. After tonight, this offer expires and we move forward with full legal warfare designed to destroy you completely. Evelyn nodded, standing with the awkwardness of late pregnancy. Constance escorted her to the door with courtesy that barely masked contempt. As Evelyn stepped into the hallway, Constance made one final comment. "Adrian will be relieved when I tell him you're being reasonable. He's been quite anxious about the trial. Perhaps now he can relax and focus on preparing for fatherhood properly." The words were calculated to communicate exactly what Evelyn needed to know, that accepting this offer would lower Adrian's guard, make him believe he'd won, create the opening her hired professionals needed to execute their plan. Constance had unwittingly given her the very tool she required. Evelyn left the building and walked 3 blocks before stopping at a coffee shop where she could sit and think without being immediately visible from the attorney's office. Her hands were shaking. The document Constance had given her felt heavy with moral compromise and financial salvation, both equally real. Her encrypted phone buzzed. Message from the professionals. Heard about meeting. If you're planning to accept their offer as misdirection, we need explicit confirmation. Cannot proceed with contract if there's any possibility you've actually surrendered. Evelyn typed her response carefully. I'm accepting the offer tonight. Will inform Constance at 8 p.m. That should lower subject's guard completely. Execute original plan within 48 hours while he's celebrating victory. The response came immediately. Understood. Timeline compressed. Execution scheduled for tomorrow evening during his commute to Dutchess County Estate to prepare for fatherhood as previously planned. Brake failure on Taconic Parkway. Accident will appear identical to method he used on his first wife. Poetic symmetry ensures media narrative writes itself. Tomorrow evening. Less than 30 hours until Adrian died in the same manner he'd killed Catherine. Less than 30 hours until Evelyn became murderer herself, having hired professionals to eliminate her daughter's father before his crimes could be properly adjudicated. The weight of that decision settled over her like physical pressure. She was about to kill someone, not in self-defense or heat of passion, but through cold premeditation and financial transaction. Everything she'd accused Adrian of being, she was becoming herself, someone who viewed murder as problem-solving, who hired professionals to make inconvenient people disappear, who prioritized outcomes over morality. But the alternative was watching Adrian raise her daughter while teaching her that violence was acceptable when deployed by people with sufficient power, was accepting that justice existed only for people wealthy enough to purchase it, was surrendering to the reality that institutions protected wealth rather than challenged it. Her daughter kicked hard, sharp pain beneath her ribs. The baby had no concept of the moral compromises being made in her name. No awareness that her mother was about to become killer to prevent her father from teaching her that killing was acceptable. The irony was profound and sickening and completely unavoidable. Evelyn composed a message to Constance. I accept your offer. I'll sign the paperwork and recant my testimony. My daughter deserves better than growing up in the middle of legal warfare. Please inform Adrian I'll be submitting revised statement to federal prosecutors tomorrow morning. She sent the message before wisdom could stop her. Watched it disappear into digital space where it would reach Constance within seconds, where Constance would immediately inform Adrian that he'd won completely. The response from Constance arrived within 5 minutes. You've made the right choice. Documents will be sent to your attorney tonight. Federal prosecutors will be notified of your recantation first thing tomorrow. Adrian is relieved and looking forward to co-parenting peacefully. You're giving your daughter the gift of stability rather than chaos. The lie was perfect. Evelyn had just convinced the Ravenshire family she'd surrendered completely, had made Adrian believe he'd won through superior resources and strategic pressure, had created exact conditions the professionals needed, a target who'd lowered his guard because he thought threats had been neutralized. Tomorrow evening, Adrian would be driving to the estate to prepare for fatherhood. He'd be relaxed, celebrating, perhaps slightly drunk on victory. His car's brakes would fail on the same stretch of highway where Catherine had died. The investigation would note the tragic symmetry. Some reporters would suggest karma. Others would call it coincidence. No one would look for hired killers because nothing about the accident would appear anything other than mechanical failure. And Evelyn would be free. Her daughter would be free. The custody arrangement would be void. Federal prosecutors might still pursue their case against a dead defendant, but more likely they'd quietly close investigation once the primary threat was eliminated. Justice would be served not through institutional channels, but through maternal desperation and hired violence. She sat in the coffee shop until darkness fell, feeling her daughter move inside her while other customers came and went, oblivious to the woman in the corner who'd just arranged a murder. Her phone buzzed periodically with messages from Agent Webb asking for location updates and safety confirmations. She ignored them. Federal protection had failed at every level. She was beyond its jurisdiction now. At midnight, she finally left the coffee shop, calling another untraceable car service to take her back to the Pennsylvania safe house. Agent Webb was waiting when she arrived, his expression carrying the particular exhaustion of federal agents watching witnesses make decisions that would haunt them forever. Constance made you an offer, he said. Not a question. Statement of fact he'd probably deduced from timeline and Evelyn's extended absence. $20 million to recant my testimony and call Adrian innocent. Are you going to take it? Evelyn met his gaze directly, letting him see exactly what she'd become. I already did. I informed Constance tonight that I'm recanting tomorrow morning. Federal prosecutors will be notified that their primary witness is withdrawing cooperation. Agent Webb's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly, understanding what she wasn't saying directly, that the recantation was misdirection rather than actual surrender, that she had plans federal agents couldn't know about because knowing made them complicit. When? He asked quietly. Tomorrow evening. During his commute. They stood in the safe house while that unspoken confirmation hung between them. Agent Webb was federal law enforcement. His entire career depended on upholding institutional justice. But he was also human enough to understand that sometimes institutions failed so completely that people took justice into their own hands because the alternative was accepting that monsters won through superior resources. I didn't hear that, Agent Webb said finally, and I won't be asking follow-up questions about what happens tomorrow evening. But if something does happen, you need to understand you'll be investigated. If any connection surfaces between you and whatever occurs, federal immunity won't protect you from conspiracy charges. I understand. Evelyn moved toward the bedroom where she'd been trying to sleep between waves of anxiety. There's no connection to find. I'm just a pregnant woman who got tired of fighting and accepted a reasonable settlement offer. Agent Webb nodded, both of them maintaining the fiction that allowed him to keep protecting her while she violated every principle federal witness protection existed to uphold. He left her alone in the small bedroom where she lay awake, feeling her daughter kick and turn, counting down hours until Adrian's death would free them both from the trap he'd spent 3 years building. Morning arrived with news that accelerated everything. Nathan called despite their recent estrangement, his voice carrying urgency that overrode any lingering tension between them. Federal prosecutors just issued statement. They're saying their primary witness recanted, and the case against Adrian Ravenshire may be dropped entirely due to insufficient evidence without her testimony. They're scheduling press conference this afternoon to address the situation. That's what I told them would happen, Evelyn said quietly. I accepted the Ravenshire family's settlement offer. Nathan was silent for a long moment. You're really giving up? After everything we exposed? After all the evidence we gathered? I'm a mother protecting her daughter. That's the only role I have left to play. The lie was necessary. Nathan was too much of a journalist to be trusted with the truth. He'd either try to stop her or document what was happening in ways that would implicate her afterward. Better he believed she'd surrendered than know she'd hired professionals to commit murder. The day progressed with agonizing slowness. Federal prosecutors held their press conference at 2 p.m., announcing with barely concealed frustration that their case against Adrian Ravenshire had collapsed due to witness recantation. Reporters asked whether this meant Adrian was innocent. The prosecutors declined to speculate, but their expressions suggested they understood exactly what had happened, that wealth had purchased silence again, that institutions had failed another woman who'd been brave enough to testify. Adrian himself appeared outside his Manhattan penthouse at 4 p.m., surrounded by his expensive attorneys, delivering brief statement about being vindicated and looking forward to fatherhood. His expression carried smug satisfaction of someone who'd won so completely that his victory felt inevitable in retrospect. He answered a few questions about whether he planned legal action against Evelyn for false accusations. His response was magnanimous. He understood pregnancy was difficult and bore her no ill will now that the truth had emerged. The performance was flawless. Adrian had fully bought the fiction that he'd won. His guard was completely lowered. He even mentioned to reporters that he was driving to the Dutchess County estate that evening to prepare the nursery for his daughter's arrival in 2 weeks. The professional sent confirmation at 5 p.m. Subject leaving Manhattan now. Traffic cameras show him taking route that leads to Taconic Parkway, as expected. Mechanical failure will occur at predetermined location. Estimate execution within 90 minutes. Accident investigation team has been prepped to rule it mechanical failure rather than sabotage. 90 minutes until Adrian died. 90 minutes until Evelyn became the thing she'd been running from, someone who killed to protect their interests, who viewed murder as acceptable when sufficiently justified, who'd learned the lesson Adrian had tried to teach her about how power actually operated. She sat in the Pennsylvania safe house while Agent Webb monitored news feeds showing Adrian's departure from Manhattan. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make Agent Webb complicit in what was about to happen. He'd turned off his phone's location tracking. He'd logged out of federal communication systems. For the next 2 hours, Agent Webb officially didn't know where he was or what his witness was doing. The minutes crawled past with excruciating slowness. 6 p.m. became 6:30. 30 minutes until Adrian reached the predetermined location on the Taconic where his brakes would fail and his car would leave the road exactly like Catherine's had 5 years ago. 30 minutes until the symmetry would be so perfect that even skeptical investigators would accept it as cosmic justice rather than hired murder. Evelyn's phone buzzed at 6:45. But the message wasn't from the professionals. It was from an unknown number, the text brief and devastating. Your contract has been compromised. Subject was warned. Additional security deployed. Cannot execute without significant risk of discovery. Aborting mission. Returning deposit. Recommend you disappear immediately. The words took several seconds to penetrate. When they did, Evelyn felt her world collapse. Someone had warned Adrian. Someone had told him about the contract on his life. Someone had compromised the one path she'd had toward protecting her daughter. Her phone rang immediately. Constance. Evelyn answered despite every instinct screaming not to. Did you really think we wouldn't discover your little murder plot? Constance's voice carried vindictive satisfaction. We have people inside every organization you've contacted. The moment you hired those professionals, we knew. We've been watching you arrange Adrian's death while pretending to surrender. It was quite entertaining. Evelyn couldn't speak. The trap had been so much more comprehensive than she'd understood. The Ravenshire family hadn't just penetrated federal protection. They'd penetrated the criminal networks she'd thought existed outside their reach. They'd watched her plan Adrian's murder, let her believe it would succeed, then warned him at the last moment to demonstrate how thoroughly they controlled every avenue she tried to use. The settlement offer was always fake, Constance continued. We wanted you to feel hope before we crushed it completely. Wanted you to believe you'd found a way out. Now you understand there is no way out. Adrian is alive. Your murder conspiracy is documented. Federal prosecutors will charge you with attempted homicide once we provide evidence, and your daughter will be born into our custody with court orders ensuring you never see her again. The line went dead. Evelyn sat in shock so complete she couldn't even process it. She'd lost. Adrian had won completely. The final desperate gambit had failed because wealthy families controlled not just legal institutions but criminal ones too. Their reach extended everywhere. Their resources purchased loyalty from people she'd thought existed outside those systems. Agent Webb's phone started buzzing despite being turned off. Emergency override. He looked at it, his expression going pale. We have a problem. Adrian Ravenshire just filed emergency motion for immediate custody. He's provided federal prosecutors with evidence that you hired contract killers. There's an arrest warrant being issued for you right now. How? The word came out hoarse. How did they know? They've been monitoring you the entire time. Agent Webb pulled up documents on his phone. They have your encrypted messages, recordings of your communications with the professionals. Everything. You were never actually hidden from them. They let you believe federal protection was working while documenting every step of your plan to murder their son. The realization was sickening. The safe houses, the federal security, the isolation that had felt like protection. All of it had been just different kind of trap. The Ravenshire family had infiltrated so completely that Evelyn had never actually been safe, had never actually been planning Adrian's death in secret, had been performing for an audience that had been watching and recording everything to use against her at precisely the right moment. Her phone buzzed again. Message from Adrian himself, just 3 words. Checkmate again, sweetheart. Then a photo. Adrian standing beside his car on the Taconic Parkway, very much alive, surrounded by additional security team. He was smiling at the camera, holding up a tablet showing live feed of the Pennsylvania safe house where Evelyn sat. The surveillance was real time. He was watching her right now, watching her realize how completely she'd been destroyed. Below the image, more text. You tried to have me killed. That makes you the monster, not me. Enjoy the arrest. My lawyers estimate you'll get 15 to 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder. My daughter will be 18 by the time you're released. She'll have been raised to understand her mother was a murderer who tried to kill her father because he wouldn't marry her. Sleep well, Evelyn. You're going to need the rest for trial. Agent Webb was already on his phone coordinating with his team. Federal marshals are en route to execute the arrest warrant. I can try to negotiate house arrest instead of jail pending your trial, but given that you're a demonstrated flight risk who just tried to hire killers, that's unlikely. I didn't mean... Evelyn started, then stopped, because of course she'd meant it. She'd hired professionals to murder her daughter's father. The fact that the Ravenshire family had known about it the entire time didn't change her intent or culpability. You need an attorney. Agent Webb was trying to remain professional, despite the catastrophic failure of everything he'd been working toward. Someone who specializes in conspiracy cases. I'll get you a list, but I can't recommend anyone specific without compromising my position as federal agent. The safe house door burst open. Federal marshals in tactical gear, moving with practiced efficiency. Evelyn was too pregnant to run, too exhausted to fight. She simply raised her hands in surrender as they approached with handcuffs designed to restrain without harming the baby. Evelyn Carter, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. One of the marshals was reading her rights while others secured the house. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed for you. The words were familiar from television and movies, but hearing them directed at her felt surreal. She was being arrested. Her daughter would be born while she was in federal custody, awaiting trial for attempted murder. The custody arrangement would be permanent. Adrian had won so completely that her destruction wasn't just thorough. It was public, documented, legally justified. They cuffed her gently, given her pregnancy, leading her toward the waiting vehicle while Agent Webb watched with expression that mixed professional duty with genuine sadness for how thoroughly this had collapsed. Outside, news vans were already gathering despite the safe house location supposedly being classified. Of course they were there. The Ravenshire family had probably alerted media the moment the arrest warrant was issued. Evelyn's public destruction would be as comprehensive as everything else. Cameras capturing her in handcuffs, reporters shouting questions about whether she'd really tried to hire killers, her face broadcast across every network as example of what happened to women who challenged powerful families. As federal marshals loaded her into the vehicle, Evelyn caught sight of her reflection in the tinted window. She looked exactly like what Adrian's attorneys had been claiming all along. Unstable pregnant woman who'd gone too far, whose accusations had transformed from testimony into conspiracy, who'd proven through her own desperate actions that she was exactly as dangerous and delusional as the Ravenshire family insisted. The vehicle pulled away from the safe house while cameras filmed everything. Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick obliviously. In 2 weeks, this baby would be born into federal custody. Within hours of birth, she'd be transferred to Adrian's family. Evelyn would get supervised visits if she was lucky, probably nothing if federal prosecutors convinced jury that she was too dangerous for even monitored contact. Her phone buzzed one final time before marshals confiscated it. Message from Constance. You should have taken the money when we offered it genuinely. Now you get nothing, not your daughter, not your freedom, not even the satisfaction of knowing you tried your best. You get prison and the understanding that you destroyed yourself completely trying to fight people who'd already won before you even understood the game was being played. The phone was taken before Evelyn could respond. Not that any response mattered, Constance was right. The game had been over before it began. Wealthy families didn't lose to pregnant women from queens. They simply deployed resources until resistance became too costly to maintain, then crushed whatever remained with legal machinery designed specifically for that purpose. The federal vehicle drove through Pennsylvania darkness toward whatever detention facility had been designated for high-profile federal defendants awaiting trial. Evelyn stared out the window at a world she'd likely not see freely again for 15 or 20 years. Her daughter would grow up without her, would be raised by the family that had murdered multiple women and gotten away with it, would learn that power justified everything and maternal love was delusion. Unless the thought arrived unbidden, dangerous, probably futile, but the only remaining option when every other avenue had failed. Unless Evelyn found a way to escape. To disappear before the baby was born. To protect her daughter by fleeing completely outside institutional systems that had proven thoroughly compromised by Ravenshire wealth. It was insane. She was 8 months pregnant, handcuffed, in federal custody with cameras documenting her every movement. Escape was fantasy that desperate people entertained to cope with hopeless situations. But desperate people with nothing left to lose occasionally accomplished fantasies because the alternative was accepting destruction. And Evelyn had learned one thing across this nightmare, that maternal love made women capable of things they'd never imagined possible, that protecting children rewrote internal calculations about acceptable risk, that sometimes the only way to save someone you loved was becoming someone you'd never wanted to be. The vehicle slowed for a traffic light. Through the window, Evelyn could see ordinary people living ordinary lives, going to dinner, walking dogs, existing in the comfortable assumption that institutional systems worked and justice was real, and wealthy people eventually faced consequences. She'd believed those things once, felt like a lifetime ago, back when she was a waitress who thought powerful men's promises meant something, before she'd learned that wealth purchased immunity from almost everything except the desperate actions of women who'd finally understood that survival required becoming monsters themselves. The light changed. The vehicle accelerated toward whatever prison would hold her until trial destroyed her completely. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling her daughter kick, and began planning one final gambit that would either free them both or ensure they died together before Adrian's family could separate them permanently. 2 weeks until her due date. 2 weeks to find an opening. 2 weeks until the final battle determined whether maternal love was stronger than generational wealth and institutional corruption. The war wasn't over. It had simply entered its most desperate phase, and Evelyn Carter was done fighting by rules written by people trying to destroy her. Tomorrow, everything changed. Tomorrow, she stopped being victim and became something the Ravenshire family had never planned for. A mother with nothing left to lose and enough rage to burn down empires, if that's what protecting her daughter required. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning, and wealthy families who thought they'd won were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is someone who's already lost everything except the will to keep fighting. The federal detention facility in Philadelphia smelled like institutional defeat, disinfectant mixed with decades of human despair absorbed into concrete walls. Evelyn sat in a cell designed for high-risk defendants, her pregnant body awkward on the narrow bunk while guards checked on her every 15 minutes because women this far along required constant monitoring in case labor started unexpectedly. The baby kicked with increasing frequency, as if sensing her mother's terror and trying to communicate something Evelyn couldn't quite understand through the fog of exhaustion and shock. 3 days since her arrest. 72 hours of documented failure, while Adrian walked free and his family prepared nurseries for the granddaughter they'd take the moment she was born. Evelyn's court-appointed attorney had visited once, a tired man named James Morrison, who specialized in hopeless cases and approached them with the weary professionalism of someone who'd stopped expecting victories decades ago. He'd explained the charges with brutal honesty. Conspiracy to commit murder carried 15 to 25 years in federal prison. Her recorded communications with the contract killers were damning. The Ravenshire family had documentation so comprehensive that conviction was nearly guaranteed. "Your best option is pleading guilty in exchange for reduced sentence," Morrison had said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of public defenders who fought losing battles against wealthy defendants daily. "Maybe get it down to 12 years with possibility of parole after 8. You'd still have a relationship with your daughter when you're released, assuming the Ravenshire family allows visitation. Assuming they allowed visitation. Assuming 8 years wouldn't be enough time to completely alienate a child who'd been raised by monsters teaching her that her mother was a dangerous criminal who'd tried to murder her father. Assuming Adrian didn't have Evelyn killed in prison before she could serve out her sentence. Wealthy families had long reach. Inmates died in federal facilities all the time from causes that were officially accidents or gang violence, but were actually contracted hits. The mathematics of survival had narrowed to a single desperate equation: escape before the baby was born, or lose everything permanently. But escape from federal detention, while 8 months pregnant, was fantasy. The facility was designed specifically to prevent flight. 24-hour surveillance, armed guards, reinforced doors, multiple security checkpoints. Even if Evelyn somehow got out of her cell, she'd never make it to the street before being caught. And the attempt would eliminate any remaining chance of reduced sentence or supervised visitation. Flight from custody added years to whatever prison term she was already facing. Yet staying meant accepting destruction, meant letting Adrian win completely, meant her daughter growing up believing lies about who her mother was and what had driven her to such desperate measures. Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, feeling her daughter kick. The baby had no concept of the trap she was about to be born into. No awareness that her first breath would also be the moment she became property of people who'd murdered at least 4 women. The innocence was unbearable. This tiny person deserved better than what either parent could offer: Adrian's murderous control or Evelyn's imprisoned desperation. A guard appeared at the cell door. "You have a visitor. Attorney-client meeting room." Evelyn struggled to her feet, her body heavy with pregnancy and defeat. Morrison must have returned with new details about plea arrangements or trial dates. She followed the guard through corridors that echoed with distant voices and slamming doors. All the ambient noise of incarceration that she'd need to learn to navigate for the next decade if she couldn't find some impossible escape. The meeting room was small, windowless, furnished with a metal table and chairs bolted to the floor. But the person waiting wasn't Morrison. It was Nathan Cole, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his expression carrying something between guilt and determination. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn's voice came out hoarse. "Last time we spoke, you were meeting with Adrian's attorneys and protecting your career." Nathan flinched at the accusation but didn't deny it. "I fucked up. I let legal pressure compromise my integrity. I chose professional survival over truth, and I've been trying to figure out how to fix it ever since your arrest." "You can't fix this." Evelyn sank into one of the chairs, her pregnant body grateful for support. "Adrian won. His family has documentation of everything. They watched me plan his murder while I thought I was being clever. There's nothing to fix because the destruction is complete." Nathan pulled out his laptop, setting it on the metal table between them. "That's what I thought too. Until I started looking at the documentation more carefully. The recordings of your communications with the contract killers, they're too perfect. The audio quality is too clean. The metadata shows they were edited in ways that suggest manipulation rather than authentic surveillance." "What does that mean?" Nathan opened files showing audio analysis and technical breakdowns that Evelyn didn't fully understand. "It means the Ravenshire family didn't just monitor you. They created evidence. They hired people to pose as contract killers, recorded your desperate attempts to protect your daughter, then edited those recordings to make them sound more damning than they actually were. You never actually hired anyone. You talked to people who claimed they could help, but no actual contract was ever established because the whole thing was entrapment designed to destroy your credibility completely." The words took several seconds to penetrate. When they did, Evelyn felt something that might have been hope, if hope hadn't been beaten out of her across the past 3 days. "You're saying it was fake? The whole murder-for-hire conspiracy was manufactured by Adrian's family? Not entirely fake. You did reach out to people claiming to offer those services. But those people were working for the Ravenshire family the entire time. They recorded your conversations, edited them to sound like completed criminal conspiracy rather than desperate inquiries, then provided that manufactured evidence to federal prosecutors. The actual crime never happened because it was never meant to. It was just another mechanism for destroying you." Nathan pulled up more documents, technical analysis from forensic audio experts he'd apparently hired using what remained of his professional credibility. "The metadata doesn't lie. These recordings were created in Ravenshire family facilities. The contract killers you thought you were hiring don't exist outside the roles Adrian's family paid them to play. You were set up from the beginning. But I sent money. I provided information about Adrian's schedule. I confirmed execution plans. To people who were feeding everything directly back to the family you thought you were fighting." Nathan's expression carried furious recognition of how comprehensively the Ravenshire family had manipulated her. They wanted you to believe you'd actually hired killers, wanted you terrified enough to follow through with increasingly incriminating communications. Then they pulled the plug at the perfect moment, right before anything actually happened, when you generated maximum evidence of intent, but they could still prevent actual crime that might have complicated their control of the narrative. Evelyn stared at the laptop screen showing technical analysis she barely understood but could feel the truth of. She'd been played from the beginning, not just monitored but actively manipulated into creating evidence of crimes that were never real possibilities. The Ravenshire family had spent weeks constructing an elaborate trap that made her look guilty while ensuring nothing actually illegal happened because Adrian's death would have complicated their plans more than it helped them. "This means the charges are fraudulent," Evelyn said slowly. "The conspiracy was manufactured. I can't be convicted of hiring contract killers who were actually working for the people I was supposedly targeting. Legally, it's complicated." Nathan closed the laptop, his expression carrying the frustration of journalists who'd found truth but weren't sure institutions would care. "You still demonstrated intent to commit murder. Even if the mechanics were entrapment, federal prosecutors could argue your willingness to hire killers constitutes conspiracy regardless of whether those killers were real. But it's also grounds for dismissal if your attorney argues entrapment defense properly." Morrison didn't mention any of this. Evelyn felt the weight of inadequate representation that came from being poor defendant facing wealthy opponents. He just told me to plead guilty and accept reduced sentence, because he doesn't have resources to do forensic analysis of evidence. Nathan's voice carried anger at systemic inequity that gave wealthy defendants entire legal teams while poor ones got overworked public defenders handling hundreds of cases simultaneously. Morrison is probably competent, but he's drowning in caseload. He doesn't have time or budget to investigate whether evidence against his clients is manufactured. He just processes plea deals and moves to the next hopeless case. So I need a different attorney. Someone with resources to fight this properly. You need the best criminal defense attorney money can buy. Nathan pulled out his phone, showing Evelyn a name and contact information. Sarah Chen. She's handled entrapment cases against wealthy families before, won most of them. She's also expensive as hell, which is why I've already paid her retainer using everything left in my savings account. The gesture was so unexpected that Evelyn couldn't immediately process it. You hired me an attorney? After I accused you of betraying me? I did betray you. Nathan's voice carried shame that seemed genuine. I let career concerns override journalistic integrity. I met with Adrian's lawyers when I should have been exposing them. This is me trying to fix it. Chen is reviewing your case right now. She thinks she can get the charges dismissed within a week based on entrapment defense and manufactured evidence. 1 week. Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly where her daughter was kicking frantically. That's still before my due date. If she can get me released, then custody arrangements become negotiable again. Nathan leaned forward, his expression intense with the particular focus of journalists who'd found angles others missed. The custody ruling was contingent on you being dangerous criminal. If criminal charges are dismissed because they were manufactured, family court has to reconsider whether Adrian's family should have custody of a child when they've demonstrated willingness to fabricate evidence and entrap the mother. It was the first genuine hope Evelyn had felt since the custody hearing. Not guaranteed victory, but at least a path forward that didn't end with her in prison, while Adrian raised their daughter to believe matricide was justified. If the charges could be dismissed, if entrapment defense worked, if federal prosecutors didn't find some other angle to maintain their case, because dropping charges against someone they'd publicly arrested would be embarrassing. Too many ifs. Too many places where institutional protection of wealth could override evidence of innocence. But it was more than she'd had 3 days ago when surrender seemed like the only option. Why are you doing this? Evelyn asked quietly. You could have walked away, protected your career. Let me disappear into federal prison while you wrote articles about how complex the case was. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his expression carrying something between guilt and recognition of complicity. Because I'm the one who made you nationally visible. I published your story thinking exposure would protect you. Instead, it just gave the Ravenshire family a bigger target. Catherine died anonymously. The paralegal died anonymously. The graduate student died anonymously. But you were on the news, your face everywhere. Your story dissected by millions of people. And that visibility made you easier to destroy publicly. I owe you this because I'm partially responsible for the destruction. The admission was more honest than Evelyn had expected from someone whose career depended on maintaining objectivity. She nodded slowly, accepting the apology implicit in Nathan's willingness to bankrupt himself hiring attorneys she couldn't afford. The guard knocked on the door. Time's up. 5 more minutes. Nathan stood, gathering his laptop. Chen will be here tomorrow morning. She'll need to go through everything with you. Your communications with the fake contract killers, the timeline of events, every detail of how the Ravenshire family manipulated you. Be completely honest with her. Don't hide anything because they'll use whatever you conceal against you later. Evelyn nodded, rising with the awkwardness of late pregnancy. Thank you. For this. For believing me when everyone else decided I was exactly what Adrian's family claimed. I never stopped believing you. Nathan moved toward the door, then paused. I just got scared. Scared of legal threats and career destruction and all the ways wealthy families punish people who challenge them. But fear isn't a good enough reason to abandon someone fighting for survival. I should have learned that earlier. The guard escorted Evelyn back to her cell where she lay on the narrow bunk feeling her daughter kick, while possibility of escape crystallized into something more concrete than fantasy. If Chen could get the charges dismissed, if entrapment defense worked, if federal prosecutors couldn't find alternative angles for maintaining her incarceration. Then maybe, there was a path forward that didn't end with her daughter being raised by monsters. She slept fitfully that night, dreaming of courtrooms and custody hearings, and Adrian's face when he realized his family's elaborate trap had collapsed because they'd been too clever for their own good. Manufacturing evidence was risky. It created paper trails, left digital signatures, required coordination among too many people who might eventually talk if sufficient pressure was applied. The Ravenshire family had gambled that their institutional power was comprehensive enough to prevent anyone from investigating too closely. Nathan had proven that gamble wrong. Morning arrived with the particular dread of incarcerated people facing another day of institutional powerlessness. But this morning also brought Sarah Chen, a woman in her early 50s who moved with the confident efficiency of attorneys who'd spent careers beating wealthy opponents at their own games. She was Korean-American, impeccably dressed, carrying herself with authority that suggested judges took her seriously when she spoke. Ms. Carter. Chen settled into the chair across from Evelyn in the same meeting room where Nathan had visited yesterday. I've reviewed your case materials. The evidence against you is comprehensive but fundamentally flawed. The Ravenshire family manufactured criminal conspiracy through systematic entrapment. That's not just grounds for dismissal, it's grounds for federal investigation of them for obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Can you actually get the charges dismissed? Evelyn needed to hear it stated directly, rather than implied through legal analysis. Yes. Chen's confidence wasn't arrogance, but professional assessment. I've handled 3 similar cases involving wealthy families who entrap defendants to neutralize threats. Won all 3 with complete dismissal plus sanctions against the families for misconduct. The key is demonstrating that you never would have pursued this course of action without active manipulation by agents working for the people you supposedly targeted. But I did want Adrian dead. I reached out to those people specifically because I wanted to hire someone to kill him before my daughter was born into his custody. Wanting someone dead isn't a crime. Chen's expression suggested she'd heard similar admissions from desperate defendants before. Acting on that desire through illegal means is criminal. But if the means were provided by the target's family specifically to entrap you into creating evidence, then the crime is theirs, not yours. They can't manufacture criminal conspiracy, then prosecute you for participating in the conspiracy they created. What happens next? Chen pulled out documents already prepared for filing. I'm submitting motion to dismiss based on entrapment defense and manufactured evidence. I'm also requesting emergency bail hearing given that your high-risk pregnancy being held in conditions inadequate for proper prenatal care. The judge assigned to your case is Miriam Holt, same judge who handled the custody hearing. She's not sympathetic to wealthy families who game the system. If I can demonstrate the Ravenshire family manufactured evidence against you, she'll be inclined to dismiss with prejudice. Judge Holt, the same woman who'd taken Evelyn's daughter away. But Chen was right. Holt's expression during the custody hearing had suggested awareness that something was wrong with how aggressively Adrian's attorneys had attacked Evelyn's credibility. Maybe she'd been constrained by the evidence presented. Maybe she'd rule differently if that evidence was proven fraudulent. How long until we know? Evelyn pressed her hand against her belly, where her daughter was kicking with increasing urgency. I have less than 2 weeks until my due date. Gias, I'm requesting expedited hearing given your pregnancy. Chen was already texting her legal team to begin filing motions. Federal system moves slowly, but judges make exceptions for defendants about to give birth. I estimate we'll have dismissal hearing within 5 days, custody reconsideration within a week after that, assuming charges are dropped. 5 days? 1 week. Still cutting it desperately close to her due date. Still leaving room for institutional delays or judicial decisions that favored wealth over evidence. But it was the best option Evelyn had. The only path that didn't end with her in prison while Adrian raised their daughter. There's something else you should know. Chen's expression shifted slightly. The forensic analysis Nathan provided wasn't just helpful for your defense. It's evidence of federal crimes committed by the Ravenshire family. I've already contacted FBI about opening investigation into witness tampering, entrapment, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. If they pursue it, Adrian and his mother could face charges more serious than what you're currently dealing with. The irony was profound. Evelyn might walk free while the family that had tried to destroy her faced criminal prosecution for the methods they'd used. justice operating in unexpected directions after taking so many wrong turns. That evening, Chen's motions were filed. By morning, news outlets were reporting the development with varying degrees of skepticism. Some framed it as desperate legal maneuvering by guilty defendant. Others noted the technical evidence suggesting manufactured conspiracy. Nathan published a detailed article in the Times, laying out the forensic analysis and raising questions about whether the Ravenshire family had entrapped Evelyn into creating false evidence. The public narrative was shifting. Not completely. Adrian still had defenders arguing that Evelyn was manipulating the system again. But doubt was entering the discourse. Questions were being asked about why the audio recordings showed signs of editing if they were supposed to be authentic surveillance. Skepticism was building about families wealthy enough to hire people to pose as contract killers specifically to entrap defendants. Adrian himself held a press conference outside his penthouse, flanked by his expensive attorneys, denying all allegations of entrapment. His performance was polished, but Evelyn noticed something she hadn't seen before: a tightness around his eyes, a slight defensiveness in his tone. He was worried. Maybe for the first time in his life, Adrian Ravenshire was facing consequences he couldn't simply purchase his way out of. 3 days after Chen filed her motions, Judge Holt scheduled the dismissal hearing. Evelyn was transported from detention to federal courthouse in Philadelphia, the same building where she'd been arraigned days earlier. This time felt different. Chen walked beside her, radiating confidence that suggested she'd already reviewed the evidence and knew how Judge Holt would rule. The courtroom was packed with media and observers who'd been following the case. Evelyn spotted Nathan in the gallery, his expression carrying cautious optimism. Agent Webb sat near the back, officially present because federal marshals had jurisdiction over her custody, but his face suggested personal investment beyond professional duty. Even Morrison appeared, her former court-appointed attorney, looking interested to see how Chen handled arguments he hadn't been equipped to make. Adrian was there too, sitting with his legal team in the gallery. He caught Evelyn's gaze as she entered, his expression carrying cold assessment. He was still confident, still certain his family's resources would prevail. But something had shifted. Adrian was here in person rather than sending attorneys. He needed to see this unfold directly, needed to confirm his control was still absolute. Judge Holt entered and everyone stood. She looked older than during the custody hearing, as if the weeks between had added years of exhaustion to someone already tired of watching wealthy families pervert her courtroom. We're here on defense motion to dismiss criminal charges based on entrapment and manufactured evidence. Judge Holt's voice was neutral, but her expression suggested she'd already reviewed the materials and formed preliminary opinions. Ms. Chen, your motion, please. Chen stood, moving to the podium with documents organized with precision that suggested years of experience presenting complex arguments to skeptical judges. Your Honor, the evidence against Ms. Carter appears comprehensive at first examination. Recorded communications, documented intent, clear conspiracy to commit murder. However, forensic analysis reveals these communications were manufactured through systematic entrapment by agents working for the alleged target's family. She walked Judge Holt through the technical analysis, the edited audio files, the metadata showing creation in Ravenshire family facilities, the fact that every contact Evelyn had made seeking help had been people working for Adrian's family specifically to create evidence against her. The presentation was methodical, building a case that this wasn't just entrapment, but active manufacturing of criminal conspiracy by the people supposedly being targeted. The federal prosecutors objected repeatedly, arguing that intent was what mattered rather than whether the conspiracy was real. But Chen countered each objection with case law demonstrating that government couldn't create crime where none would otherwise exist. And if government couldn't do it, private families certainly couldn't manufacture evidence, then provide it to prosecutors expecting conviction. Judge Holt listened with increasing intensity, her expression darkening as the full scope of the Ravenshire family's manipulation became clear. When Chen finished her presentation, the judge turned to federal prosecutors. Does the government dispute the forensic analysis showing these recordings were edited and created in facilities owned by the alleged victim's family? The prosecutor, a young woman who'd probably never handled a case this complex before, shuffled her papers nervously. We're still reviewing the technical evidence, Your Honor, but we maintain that Ms. Carter's intent to commit murder is clear from the communications regardless of how they were obtained. Intent manufactured through active manipulation by the supposed target. Judge Holt's voice carried barely contained anger. Ms. Chen is correct that this isn't simple entrapment. This is systematic creation of criminal conspiracy for the purpose of neutralizing legal threats through false prosecution. That's not just grounds for dismissal, that's grounds for sanctions. The courtroom went silent. Evelyn felt her heart hammering, her daughter kicking frantically, as if sensing the moment hanging in balance. Judge Holt was angry, not at her, at the Ravenshire family for using the justice system as weapon against someone they couldn't control through other means. Motion to dismiss is granted. Judge Holt's gavel came down with finality. All charges against Evelyn Carter are dismissed with prejudice. Federal prosecutors are directed to investigate the Ravenshire family for witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to manufacture false evidence. Ms. Carter is to be released immediately from custody. The words landed like physical sensation. Released. The charges were gone. The manufactured conspiracy dismissed because Chen had proven what Morrison never could have, that wealthy families who played too cleverly with the justice system sometimes got caught in their own traps. Adrian's face across the courtroom went pale, his expression shifting from confidence to recognition that he'd just lost control of narrative he'd spent weeks constructing. His attorneys were already moving, filing objections, requesting reconsideration, doing everything possible to prevent the dismissal from standing. But Judge Holt was done listening. This case represents exactly the kind of institutional manipulation I've spent 30 years trying to prevent in my courtroom. Her voice carried fury that had been building across decades of watching wealthy defendants game the system. The Ravenshire family will answer to federal investigators about their conduct, and I'm directing immediate reconsideration of custody arrangements given that those arrangements were based on criminal charges now proven to be manufactured. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down again, and Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of actual freedom. Not just release from detention, but freedom from the systematic destruction Adrian's family had been orchestrating since the night she'd discovered Catherine's murder documentation. Chen turned to her with satisfied expression of attorneys who'd just won cases everyone thought were hopeless. You're free to go. Federal marshals will process your release within the hour. Custody reconsideration hearing is scheduled for next week. But given Judge Holt's ruling today, I'm confident we can overturn the previous decision. Nathan reached her before she'd even left the courtroom, his expression mixing relief with vindication. You're out. The charges are gone. Adrian's family is under federal investigation. This is everything we needed. Agent Webb appeared next, his professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine satisfaction. I'm glad it worked out. For what it's worth, I never believed you were actually dangerous, just desperate. There's a difference. Evelyn nodded, too overwhelmed for coherent response. Everything that had seemed inevitable 3 days ago had collapsed. The trap had reversed. Adrian's family had been too clever, too confident in their ability to manufacture evidence without consequences. Now they were facing federal investigation while she walked free. But freedom didn't erase what she'd learned about herself across this nightmare. She'd been willing to hire killers to protect her daughter, had crossed moral lines she'd believed were uncrossable, had discovered that maternal love made her capable of violence she'd never imagined. The fact that the contract killers were fake didn't change her intent, didn't erase that she genuinely wanted Adrian dead and had tried to make it happen. That knowledge would stay with her forever. The understanding that she wasn't who she'd thought she was, that desperation rewrote internal codes about acceptable behavior, that protecting children sometimes revealed monstrous capacities in otherwise ordinary people. The release processing took 2 hours. Paperwork, verification, return of personal belongings that had been confiscated during arrest. By the time Evelyn walked out of the federal courthouse, evening was falling over Philadelphia. Nathan was waiting with his car, ready to drive her wherever she needed to go. Where do you want to go? Nathan asked as they pulled into traffic. Safe house? Hotel? I can arrange security if you're worried about the Ravenshire family. I need to see the estate. Evelyn surprised herself with the answer. The place where this all started, where I found Catherine's documentation. I need to see it one more time before the custody hearing. Nathan glanced at her with concern. That's still Adrian's property. If he's there, he won't be. Adrian's in Manhattan managing his family's response to federal investigation. The estate will be empty except for staff. I need to see it. Need to understand how I let myself be trapped there for 3 years. The drive to Dutchess County took 2 hours through darkness, broken occasionally by small towns that sparkled with ordinary lives. Evelyn watched the landscape pass while her daughter kicked persistently, running out of room inside her mother's body. Less than a week until due date. Less than a week until birth forced this tiny person into a world still battling over who would raise her. The estate appeared through trees exactly as Evelyn remembered. Imposing colonial mansion isolated on 12 acres of carefully maintained grounds. Nathan parked outside the main entrance. The house was dark except for security lighting. Mrs. Kovac would be inside somewhere, maintaining the property while Adrian dealt with federal investigators in Manhattan. "You sure about this?" Nathan asked as Evelyn struggled out of the car, her pregnant body awkward with exhaustion. "I need to see the conservatory where he told me he'd killed Catherine. Need to stand in that space and understand how I survived it." They approached the side entrance Adrian always used. The door was unlocked. Either Mrs. Kovac had gotten careless, or the staff assumed no one would dare trespass on Ravenshire property. Evelyn entered the house that had been her prison for 3 years, navigating through familiar rooms that looked smaller now than in memory. Wealth that had once seemed like fairy tale luxury now revealed itself as expensive camouflage for moral emptiness. The conservatory was exactly as she remembered. Rain hammered the glass panels, October storm identical to the night Adrian had told her he was never leaving his fiancée. The night everything had started collapsing. Evelyn stood where she'd stood that night, pressing her hand against the cold glass, feeling her daughter kick where Adrian's child had kicked then. 3 years of her life spent in this house, believing powerful men's promises. 3 years of systematic manipulation, while Adrian refined the same methods he'd used to kill 4 women before her. Nathan hung back near the door, giving her space to process whatever she needed to work through. But his presence was a solid reminder that she wasn't alone this time. Wasn't isolated in Adrian's carefully constructed trap. Had people who believed her story enough to risk their careers proving it. Why didn't I see it earlier? Evelyn spoke to her reflection in the dark glass. All the signs were there. The way he controlled everything, the isolation, the coldness masked as protection. Why did it take finding Catherine's murder documentation for me to understand what he was? Because wealthy men are very good at making their control seem like care. Nathan moved closer, his voice carrying understanding of someone who'd spent years investigating how power operated. Adrian had practice. He'd refined his methods across multiple women. You weren't naive. You were targeted by someone who'd learned exactly how to make traps look like romance. The absolution was generous, but Evelyn couldn't quite accept it. She'd participated in her own imprisonment, had ignored warning signs because the alternative was admitting she'd wasted 3 years on someone incapable of love, had stayed in the trap even after recognizing its existence because leaving seemed harder than enduring. "I almost became him," she said quietly. "Almost hired people to kill him the same way he killed Catherine. The only difference is his family caught me before I could complete it. The difference is you were protecting your daughter." Nathan's voice was firm. "Adrian killed to protect his power and reputation. You tried to kill to protect a child from being raised by monsters. The methods might look similar, but the motivations are completely different. Are they?" Evelyn pressed her hand harder against the glass, feeling Rain's vibration through her palm. "Or is that just the story we tell ourselves to justify violence when we're the ones committing it? Adrian probably believed he was protecting his family's legacy when he killed Catherine, protecting his political future, protecting things that mattered to him, even if they were selfish and corrupt. My motivations were better, but the willingness to kill was the same." The question hung in the conservatory while rain hammered glass and Evelyn's daughter kicked rhythmically against her ribs. She'd crossed lines she'd believed were uncrossable, had discovered capacities for violence that would stay with her forever. The fact that Adrian's family had manufactured the conspiracy didn't erase her genuine intent, didn't change that she'd wanted him dead badly enough to seek out people who killed for money. That knowledge was permanent scar tissue, proof that maternal love could be just as ruthless as masculine control when pushed far enough, that the difference between victim and perpetrator was sometimes just matter of who had resources to act on their violent impulses first. "We should go," Nathan said gently. "You've seen what you needed to see. Now we focus on the custody hearing and making sure your daughter doesn't grow up in this place." Evelyn nodded, turning away from the conservatory's windows. As she did, she caught movement in her peripheral vision, not from outside, but from the hallway leading deeper into the house. Someone was there. Someone had been listening to their conversation. Mrs. Kovach appeared from the shadows, her expression carrying something between contempt and unexpected sympathy. "You shouldn't be here. This is private property. I lived here for 3 years." Evelyn met the housekeeper's gaze directly. "I think I've earned the right to visit one last time." Mrs. Kovach studied her for a long moment, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal the actual woman beneath. "He would have killed you, just like he killed Mrs. Catherine. I've worked for this family 30 years. I've seen things, heard things, cleaned up things I pretend I didn't notice. He would have killed you the moment you stopped being useful." The admission was stunning. Mrs. Kovach, whose loyalty Adrian had described as transactional, had apparently reached limits of her complicity. 3 decades of service to family built on murder and corruption had finally become unbearable. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Nathan pulled out his phone, already recording. "If you witnessed—" "Because families like the Ravenshires destroy people who talk." Mrs. Kovach's voice was flat. "They destroyed Mrs. Catherine when she tried to expose them. They destroyed every woman who got too close to Adrian's secrets. I stayed quiet because I have grandchildren who depend on my income and pension. But watching them try to destroy you through manufactured evidence while you're pregnant with his child, that's too much even for someone as professionally compromised as me."